This army commander totally humiliated the third prince, calling him trash and a rat just because he's the son of a concubine. The kid is usually weak and always takes the abuse, but not this time. An oppressive, murderous aura almost crushed the soldier. Then the prince picked up a twig and said that insults must be paid for with life. This story actually starts a bit before all that. This is Prince Callian Lane Caris, son of a servant and a lord, third in line to the throne of Caris, the most powerful nation on the continent. He's weak, humiliated, and completely alone inside the palace. His half-brothers barely acknowledge he exists. The knights call him a rat. Even the servants walk on eggshells around him. What nobody knows is that everything just changed. Inside that fragile body, it's no longer the same Callian. It's Baron Secretia, a king who lost everything. In his previous life, Baron ruled Secretia with strength and honor, until an object called the Axis of Time showed up in his palace and triggered an impossible war. Caris demanded the object. Secretia refused. The war started way too fast. Like Kairos had been waiting for an excuse all along. Barun fought to the end and got taken down by Commander Arson on a devastated battlefield. The man behind all of it was the Mad King of Caris, Planch. Then Barun woke up here, 10 years before the war, inside the body of a prince from the enemy's own country. He's got a window of opportunity, and it's closing fast. The original Callian is going to be murdered in 1 or 2 months before he even turns 15. The one who ordered it is the palace queen herself. Barun knows this. He also knows a secret that not even the loyal servants are aware of. Callian was a mage. 3 mana circles are hidden near the prince's heart, but using them causes pain that could kill him before any assassin even gets close. With time running out, Baron makes his first real decision: stop hiding. He cuts his own hair. He stops looking at the floor. And when Planch throws a knife at his servant during breakfast, Barun catches it with his bare hand, bleeds, smiles, and quietly sets the knife down next to Planch without saying a word. The second prince doesn't know what to do with that. He'd never seen it before. The next move is bigger. Out on the training grounds, Commander Pable, a knight loyal to the family that props up Planch's power, calls Callian a bastard rat in front of everyone. The old Callian would have pressed himself against the wall and apologized. Barun smiles, picks up a tree branch, asks Pable what exactly his duty is, and before the commander finishes answering, he's already jumping behind him. With nothing but a branch, he knocks the trained commander's sword clean out of his hands. Pable drops to his knees and begs forgiveness out loud, right in front of his own men. Heard him apologize, assuring that he had no intention of committing treason. As Pable finished, begging the prince for forgiveness, Baron merely looked at him with contempt. Still before the prince, with his face turned to the ground, Pable thought he would never forget that humiliation imposed by the third prince. Jan, Baron's servant, with an expression of astonishment, asked why someone who had gone out to train endurance was appearing with a horse. The servant finished his statement as Baron cheerfully held a black horse by the reins. Baron handed the reins to Jan, saying that he had found the horse on the way and that its name was Corvo. Jan asked where Baron had been. After all the commotion between the prince and the commander had calmed down, Baron spotted a horse and asked what was wrong with it. The horse was reluctant to the knight's commands as no one could tame it. It was a truly fierce and strong horse. Then, the prince had an idea, remembering that the horse belonged to Planch. His servant, Jan, was startled that Baron had brought Planch's horse on his own. The prince then said that Planch had allowed anyone to use it and whispered to his trainer to keep secret what had happened with Pable. With a trembling voice, Jan expressed his fear that the second prince would find out, but Baron reassured him, saying that everything would be fine no matter what happened. Baron then felt a sharp pain in his heart again, which startled his 2 vassals. With a hand on his chest, Baron thought he had pushed his body too hard. His servant asked if the endurance training wasn't too much for him, and the prince replied that it wasn't. He had merely enjoyed himself with someone afterward. Someone who had been secretly observing the 3 quickly left to avoid being noticed, while Baron told Jan to go to dinner. In a garden gazebo, a seated person received information from another. Holding a flower in his hands, he said that even worms squirm when stepped on. Then, he crushed the flower forcefully and stated that no matter how much someone like Baron tried to squirm, he could not change his origins. Tossing the flower to the ground, he declared that it wouldn't be fun to merely pressure and kill, and that for now, they would just observe. Once again, the 3 princes were gathered for another meal. Baron thought he couldn't get used to that atmosphere, even though he was there every day. Prince Planch displayed a different demeanor than usual, with a thoughtful gaze. Baron noticed him and wondered why Planch seemed so disheartened that day. As he drank his wine, Planch wondered if the queen and the viscount were late because of him, and that he couldn't couldn't control his expression. Suddenly, the dining room door opened swiftly. Everyone rose from their chairs and turned their gaze toward the entrance, while Baron caught a scent that reminded him of something. Baron was very pleased with the person entering the dining room. It was the queen, dazzling in a green dress with her baby blue hair. Seleti Bryson, the second queen and current sovereign of Kyrus, was the true power behind that kingdom. After the previous queen's death by illness, Seleti ascended to this position, using her family's power to control the royal knights. Most nobles also supported the Brisson family, and thus, Khaleesi's power grew daily. Consequently, the third prince, Callian, became an insignificant figure, even to a mere commander. The Viscount, who entered with the queen, informed her about how they would deal with Pabel, and she confirmed, saying they would give him adequate compensation. Sitting at the table, the queen told the Viscount not to report such trivial matters in the future, and he replied that he understood. The queen, looking at Baron, questioned why she should concern herself with such insignificant matters. Baron merely watched her with a serious and cold gaze. Everyone at the table remained silent, simply observing the events. The queen then called the third prince, Callian, who turned his gaze to her. She commented that he had grown quite a bit lately. Callian offered a slight smile, which surprised the queen, given his unexpected reaction. Holding his wine glass, he replied that he hadn't grown that much yet. Callian concluded with a smile, asserting that he would certainly grow much more in the future. The other two princes were astonished by his reply. The queen glared at him with a hint of anger due to that response. The Viscount then, with great enthusiasm, declared that no matter how much Callian had grown, while he spoke, Planch cast an angry sidelong glance at Baron. The queen, his mother, whispered, asking why he hadn't told her anything. Planch, confused, inquired about what she was talking about. She explained that it was about his horse, which did not obey his commands. Planch did not immediately understand what his mother meant. When he finally understood, Planch turned his face away, embarrassed by what had happened. The queen then said it would have been good if he had told her earlier, but Planch replied that she already knew. Planch gripped his fork angrily, while the queen insisted that he had never mentioned the horse did not respect his commands. He then slammed his fork on the table, declaring that the horse had been useless from the start. Next, Planch rose from his chair and announced that he would leave first. His mother, the queen, was startled by his attitude and called his name. 3 weeks passed, and the king's birthday arrived. All the vassals were extremely dedicated to ensuring nothing went wrong with the celebration. Several horses arrived, laden with gifts for the king. There was great anticipation that the banquet would be sumptuous. The people of the kingdom wondered if the princes were already preparing for the celebration, and anxiety was widespread. Meanwhile, the tailor checked the measurements he had previously taken of the third prince, Callian. He noticed that the measurements were different from before and wondered why. As he prepared to ask Callian, Baron, if he was eating well, he was interrupted by a drop of blood falling to the floor. Looking at Prince Callian's face, the tailor was greatly alarmed by what he saw. Prince Callian was bleeding profusely from his nose and seemed very alarmed by the situation. Immediately, all the vassals rushed to help the bleeding prince. The prince's servant shouted for another vassal to bring a cloth, while Callian insisted it was not that serious. Callian said it was because he had not slept well in recent days, but Jan, his servant, retorted that this was not the problem. The tailor interrupted, saying that the bleeding itself was not the only problem. He then added that the young Prince Callian had also lost weight in recent days, and that this loss was noticeable on his body. The bleeding was subsiding. Callian, Baron, knew he had lost weight lately. With a smile, Callian, Baron, seeking to alleviate their concern, said he had exercised a lot in recent days. Callian, Baron, began to reflect that despite all the work, his stamina only worsened. It always hurt a lot when he used mana. Callian, Baron, believed there must be some problem with his own heart. The tailor, irritated, said that this was not something he should take lightly, and asked if he had undergone any checkups. Callian, Baron, replied that it was not necessary. Callian, Baron, wondered why he had to have a nosebleed in front of so many people. The tailor tried to counter the prince's ideas, but Callian, Baron, firmly stated that he was fine. Jan then said he could not be at ease with the situation, and that the reason for the bleeding was because the prince kept picking his nose. He continued, saying it must have been difficult for the prince to tell everyone about such a personal hobby. Callian, Baron, was astonished by what his servant was saying, while the vassals whispered among themselves. Jan concluded, stating that the prince was eating and exercising very well, and that the bleeding must be due to his hobby. The tailor agreed, since Jan knew the prince better than they did. Then Jan looked at Prince Callian with a smile and winked at him. Callian, Baron, still did not understand. Prince Callian then remembered the day Jan had been worried about his situation. On that occasion, Callian Italian had told Yan that he could use magic and that his health problem was due to mana. The prince, with an astonished expression, wondered if Yan intended to ruin his image in that way. However, he felt relief when he realized that his servant had found an excuse to get them out of that embarrassing situation. The tailor then reiterated that he would fix the clothes as previously promised. He expressed some apprehension, as he did not have much time. Yan, however, assured him that the prince had other commitments first, which would give them enough time. The tailor left satisfied, relieved to have time to complete his tasks, while Yan whispered, calling the prince. The prince asked Baron, his voice slightly trembling, if the awaited day had arrived. Baron remained thoughtful, consumed by anxiety about what was to come. He knew he needed to meet the mage Ellen. Regardless of the mage's health, the news would spread throughout the palace. Therefore, before the information became public, he needed to find the mage Ellen at all costs. When lunchtime arrived, they headed to the designated place, but they were informed that due to an urgent matter, lunch had been cancelled. Instead, the meal would be replaced by individual meetings with each person. The prince was surprised by the sudden change and wondered how there would be time to meet everyone individually. Baron pondered if it wouldn't be more effective to meet everyone at once, but he followed closely behind the butler. They arrived at the first chamber, and Baron felt a slight nervousness, as he had not expected a private meeting. The door opened, and a voice instructed the prince to enter, for his majesty was waiting for him. The prince entered the chamber and saw a man sitting on the sofa, engrossed in reading a newspaper. It was the king of Kairis, Romain Leroux Kairis, who remained focused on his reading. The third prince then bowed in greeting to his majesty. Next, he slowly straightened up, seeking eye contact with the king. However, something left him astonished and surprised. The king showed no regard for his presence, continuing to read the newspaper. Baron thought that although he himself was not always faithful to Kairis's etiquette, he was aware that the king's attitude was rude. The king then called him to sit down. The king congratulated him on his 38th birthday and asked about his well-being. With his gaze still fixed on the newspaper, the king commented that he seemed to be well, which astonished the prince. The prince recalled all his vassals who had been concerned about his health. He thought that even the passing attendants knew he had recovered quickly. The prince understood why the king wished to see them one by one, even with the lack of time. If the king met all three sons at the same time, he would have to concentrate on the conversation. Therefore, one at a time was easier. For the king, spending time with his sons who wished to congratulate him was a waste. Baron found the customs of that family strange. A father who did not care for his children. The first prince, who cared about nothing that happened. And the second prince, who had no etiquette whatsoever, smelled of alcohol, and treated his vassals in the worst possible way. As Baron concluded his thoughts, someone entered the dining room. The king, with a tone of evident annoyance, said that she was late. It was the queen who had just arrived. With a mocking tone, she said that it simply happened. As the queen entered with a sarcastic smile, Baron concluded that she possessed enough power to disdain the king. The prince then, with a smile on his face, merely thought that there was someone among them trying to kill him. As a vassal loudly announced the start of the event, Baron tried to discern who would send someone to kill the prince. As the prince appeared before the people, someone commented to another person that he was completely transformed. In comparison, the second prince, Planch, seemed completely drunk. Those commenting on this were the queen and the king. The queen concluded that it would change nothing. People were just making noise. As he drank his wine, the king said that something was different, that unlike the past, something had changed. Then, the third prince was announced and entered the hall, drawing the attention of all present, leaving everyone astonished by what they saw. So the rumors were true, the people present thought. The prince with black hair and red eyes who resembled Cisphanian. The prince's new look caught everyone's attention, especially the fact that he had cut the bangs that covered his face. He also wore a very bright red brooch, which enhanced the color of his eyes. That was, then, a declaration that he would no longer hide. The prince smiled happily as everyone noticed his attire. Then, his servant Jan leaned in and whispered, asking why all eyes were fixed on him and his attire. Jan then stated that he already knew the reason, and Prince Baron stared at him, awaiting his explanation. With a radiant smile, the servant asked if the reason was his beauty, adding that Seton would be happy to see him like this. Baron was surprised by Jan's remark. Baron explained that the gazes were due to the jewels he was wearing. As he spoke, he recalled the tailor's hard work to craft them. Baron advised Jan to be content with what had been used, because if he had opted for all the pieces, the situation would have been much worse. Jan, however, insisted that the prince looked great. As they walked through the hall, Baron asked if Jan's family resided in Kairis, the capital of Kairis. Jan was surprised by the prince's recollection. The servant explained that his younger sister and father had returned to their hometown, and only the rest of the family lived in Kairis. The prince then asked if they would come to the royal palace. Jan replied that they would, if they received an invitation. Baron stopped and stared at him. Trying to change the subject, Jan asked when he should leave Raven, who was waiting for them in the garden. Baron realized that the servant did not wish to talk about his family. The prince thought, there must be things he prefers not to say. Baron answered Jan's question, stating that they would wait for the right moment. The prince mentioned that there was someone he would like to see, which surprised his servant. Baron asked Jan if he knew why the hall was called Siegfried. The servant replied that, of course he did. It was named after the first patriarch and one of the war heroes, Duke Quitros Han Siegfried. The ducal family Siegfried, the only one in Kyrus, despite possessing great power, had remained loyal to the royal family for over 500 years, with an unwavering commitment to defending the Cisphanian territory. Baron recalled being impressed when he heard that story while he was in Baron. Jan then asked if, by any chance, the person the prince wished to see. Before Jan could finish his question, the answer revealed itself. At that exact moment, a loud laugh drew both their attention. A man commented that Siegfried's summer night is always a classic. Jan then pointed to the prince. He's right there! It was Duke Slyman Hun Siegfried, a very elegant man with a well-groomed beard, long hair, and a captivating smile. Baron felt satisfied, as he appreciated people from families with such enduring loyalty. Prince Baron subtly began to emanate his magic, testing the Duke's perception. Slyman quickly noticed the emanation of magic in the surroundings. He turned his face directly toward the third prince. Upon making eye contact with Baron, Slyman noticed that the magic emanated from him. Baron ceased the emanation of magic. He was satisfied. As expected, Slyman had detected him instantly, even with so little of his power flowing. Jan then commented that the Duke was showing interest in the prince. The prince knew that Slyman was one of the continent's 5 master swordsmen, so there was no way he wouldn't notice. Baron said it was still too early for that. He asked Jan to act as if he hadn't noticed Slyman's gaze, turning and moving out of the Duke's line of sight. Slyman then watched them as they walked away, aware that the power emanated from the young prince. Soon after, the king made a toast, thanking everyone for their presence and congratulations, and invited them all to enjoy the night in Kyrus's name. Then, Baron and Jan jumped out the window, using a rope they had prepared beforehand, and headed for the garden. There, Planch's horse, known for its disobedience, awaited the third prince. However, under Baron's commands, the horse appeared calm and gentle, even receiving praise from the prince. Jan, however, warned Baron not to be fooled. But upon observing the horse's behavior in Baron's presence, Jan admitted that the animal was truly intelligent. The servant asked if they should head for the main gate, and the prince replied yes, because, for now, no one entered without an invitation. As they approached the gate, they noticed a commotion among the guards and a visitor who claimed to have traveled a long way, but even so, a guard informed him that he could not enter, and asked him to leave gently. Baron observed the entire scene. The prince was surprised as he recognized the visitor. The visitor asked the guard if the refusal of entry was due to the lack of an invitation. It was Ellen Manisol. All the guards were astonished upon discovering the identity of the man on horseback. They became frightened and began to whisper among themselves. Then, one of the guards insisted that, even knowing who he was, he still needed an invitation. Elon then smiled from beneath his hood. He commented, confronting the guard, "What a shame. So Kyrus differentiates the class of its guests by appearance?" Baron, who was listening to the conversation from afar, was astonished by the mage's words. Baron reflected on the difficulty of judging people by their attire. However, he realized that Ellen wasn't just criticizing for the sake of it. It seemed the mage was looking for a pretext not to enter Kyrus. Then, Ellen turned his horse and announced that he would return soon. Baron watched the mage walk away, thinking he couldn't miss that opportunity. His servant, as if reading his thoughts, reminded him that the king's orders prohibited anyone from leaving during the festival. As Elon slowly distanced himself from Kyrus, Baron thought that if they continued like this, they would quickly lose him. Baron instructed Jan to do whatever was necessary to stop the guards, while he himself rode quickly towards the gate. Pulling away from Jan, who was trying to shout for his prince, Baron merely urged his horse to go faster. The guards in front of the gate ordered the prince to stop his horse immediately. They reiterated that leaving was forbidden by royal decree. With great dexterity, the prince's horse leaped over the soldiers and continued quickly towards the exit. The guards were astonished by the scene and the horse's speed. Shouting at the top of their lungs, the guards announced that the prince had left Kyrus. Then, the guards rushed to get their horses and follow the prince immediately. Jan, still stunned by everything, didn't know how to help the prince in that situation. He remembered the prince's order to do the impossible to stop the guards. Jan then motivated himself, stating to himself that he was Prince Callion's attendant, and his duty was to protect him at all costs. In an act of bravery, he shouted for all the guards to stop immediately. Jan declared that Duke Siegfried had permitted Callion's departure. One of the guards retorted, asking who he was to use the Duke's name in such a way. Then, untying his hair, he revealed himself to be surrounded Saroyan Siegfried. With his hair loose in the wind, he declared himself the eldest son of Duke Siegfried. Sometime later, someone was heard having a great time, letting out loud laughter. Jan, now Saroyan, sat visibly embarrassed, while beside him someone laughed incessantly. Saroyan, still very embarrassed, said that it was nothing to be proud of. Then, he exclaimed, drawing the attention of his father, the Duke, who, still laughing, said he couldn't believe his son had done something so clever. Playfully, as a father would with a child, the Duke commented that his son had gone out to take care of a boy. The Duke then stated that it was a good decision by Jan, but Jan retorted that it was not, as Your Highness would ruin the relationship between him and the king. Jan's father, the Duke, said he would not ask about what had happened. Jan was surprised by his father's answer and calm demeanor. The Duke reiterated that he would not ask questions about what had happened. Duke Siegfried pondered the implications. If the prince receives help from the Siegfried family, he will become cautious about our assistance. If there is a relationship where he receives help but is not punished, it would be the same as acknowledging a friendly relationship between our family and the prince. Brisson will certainly criticize this. All of this will likely be suppressed as if nothing happened, Duke Siegfried concluded. Prince Baron was still pursuing the mage Ellen and was almost catching up to him near a fountain. Ellen noticed Baron's presence and commented that it didn't seem like the prince was there to criticize him for not receiving an invitation. The mage inquired why the third prince of Kyrus was following this old man. Baron then remembered hearing that upon reaching the 7th circle, aging regressed. It seemed that this was indeed true. Prince Baron then said that it was already late and asked if Elon would simply return. Elon replied that when he tried to open a closed door, the threshold still seemed too high. Baron did not understand what Elon meant by that, whether it was a hint or not. He only knew that there was nothing he could do for him. Baron then said that Ellen had gone to a closed door when another was open for him. He asked where the mage had kept the invitation that had been offered to him. Face to face with Ellen, Baron stated that he himself was blocking the wind and had forgotten to clean the dirt from the threshold. He added that he had not expected the guard's mistake. The mage was astonished by the way Baron spoke, wondering if the prince was honest or merely brazen. Then Ellen gave a small smile, thinking that Baron was a very amusing prince. Looking at the prince, Ellen remembered that when he first saw him, Baron's gaze did not seem like that of a 14-year-old boy. Next, he noticed the prince's hand. Ellen noticed something different about the prince that instantly caught his attention. Ellen called out to the prince, who waited for him to finish speaking. Then, quickly, Ellen apologized for a moment and took Baron's hand, pulling it close. Baron, not understanding what was happening, tried to ask Ellen's intentions. However, the mage was already beginning to use his magic, seeking to activate the latent energy in the prince's body. Immediately, Baron felt the familiar pain in his heart, the same one that afflicted him whenever his own magic was activated. Ellen's mana flowed into the prince's body, but Baron's mana repelled it forcefully, causing a slight explosion that pushed them apart. The horses, startled, recoiled, and Baron continued to feel an intense pain in his chest. Ellen then uttered, "Even with the doors closed, the wind cannot be completely blocked." Baron understood that the mage had already perceived the true condition of his body. Repeating Elon's words, he questioned, "The wind cannot be blocked." Baron admitted that the mage was right to a certain extent, as he himself could not use mana. Elon, in his thoughts, pondered that the problem was not mana itself, and wondered if the prince truly did not know the cause of his inability. Observing Baron's fist, the mage concluded his reasoning. If he does not know that the real problem lies elsewhere, then Ellen stared at Baron firmly, clenching his own fist. The Kyries treated mages with disdain, despite being descendants of dragons. The great mage Ellen had come of his own accord, with the intention of deceiving them. However, he found himself in a meeting with the young prince, following him to an uncertain destination. Elon then asked why the prince wished to see him. Baron, still breathless from the rapid turn of events, began to speak. He knew that any lie would be perceived by the mage, so he decided to be sincere with Ellen. Baron dismounted from his horse and, slowly approaching the mage, said that he would like to know his name. Then the prince concluded that he believed his life would soon be in danger. Ellen, watching the prince speak, thought, "It's not that I'm unaware of the third prince's situation. He is simply hated by everyone, a prince surrounded by enemies." Suddenly, a spell was cast around the two of them, startling Baron with its speed. While Ellen dismounted from his horse with an agile leap, Baron wondered if it was a silent spell, still astonished by the mage's ability to conjure without uttering a single word. Ellen then asked the prince what his objective was. "Do you simply want to prevent this from happening?" Ellen questioned. "Or are you trying to get rid of the true cause?" he asked again. The prince replied that for now he was just trying to prevent it from happening. Ellen was astonished by the young man's answer. Baron continued, stating that he truly simply wanted to eliminate the source of the problem. He concluded his answer by saying that if he needed to take the throne to achieve his goal, then he would do so. With a disbelieving smile, Ellen thought that the throne was merely an option for the prince to achieve his goal, while he himself was a dying prince. The prince, who resembles Sisfanian, needs my help for his objective, Ellen concluded. The mage found all of this very interesting and became quite excited. Then, the mage asked the prince to show him what he had to offer as a formal invitation. Without hesitation, the prince knelt before the mage. He introduced himself, stating his full name, Callian Rain Caris, and greeted his mentor. Ellen Manisil accepted His Highness's invitation. Looking at the young prince kneeling before him, Ellen thought that he would save his life. The scene then shifted to Yan, who was talking with his father, asking if he was certain that people did not know who he was. The Duke replied that he had taken care of it, and that Yan did not need to worry. Yan, in turn, commented that if he had been recognized, he could not have remained there. While the Duke continued to speak about Yan's identity, the young man remembered something. Somewhat distressed, he asked about someone named Leah. His question about her well-being caught his father's attention, who stopped speaking immediately. The Duke replied that Leah was doing very well in the position of head of the lower family, a role that Yan had abandoned. The Duke stood up, stretching, and said that Yan would be welcome back at any time. Sighing, he added that he thought he would not see him for a long time. Yan, with his head down, asked what he was talking about, as they would see each other again in 3 months. Duke Siegfried, surprised by his son's words, questioned if Yan truly intended to abandon his position as the prince's servant. Yan, in turn, remained thoughtful, with his head bowed. He replied that he would soon turn 15. His father, the Duke, was surprised by the answer and merely watched him in silence. Next, the Duke called his son, who looked at him attentively. He asked if Yan knew the Siegfried family's nickname, and Yan confirmed. Before Yan could even finish, his father affirmed that he was correct. With a smile, the Duke revealed, "We are the elephants of Kairis." For a long time, they had never contended for the throne, but they had always known of their immense power. They are called the King of Animals, untouchable even by beasts, the Duke concluded the explanation. With a thoughtful look, Yan began to ask why his father had suddenly brought up that subject, but he was interrupted. His father hugged him tightly, saying that the name they carried was very powerful. Still embracing his son, the Duke told Yan to do everything he wished. Yan held his father's arm, overflowing with happiness at the words he had just heard. Then, his father began to lightly squeeze his neck, calling him a rascal for making him worry. Yan, in turn, asked him to stop, as it was hurting. Father and son continued to enjoy themselves together on that beautiful night. Yan composed himself, ready to resume his role as a servant, and called his father Duke Siegfried. The Duke questioned him for addressing him formally, and told him to scram immediately. Yan then bowed before his father, and said that he would see him next time. The Duke merely watched him leave, sitting on the bench. The Duke then commented that Yan's senseless tantrum only confirmed that he was definitively a Siegfried. Next, the Duke recalled the moments in the hall when the prince exuded magic, and wondered when the prince had grown so much. Observing the night sky, under a beautiful full moon, the Duke wondered what the prince was truly planning. The day dawned splendidly, with a sky as blue as the sea, dotted with clouds, while some horses approached. A carriage entered, and people could hardly believe what they saw, questioning if that crest was truly what they thought. The crest displayed 7 red flowers and a silver cane. A lady commented to a man that she had heard that Ellen Manisil's contract with Reberin had ended. The man then asked how Ellen was in Kairos. "Isn't it an obvious decision since he went through something like this?" the woman asked. "If it weren't for the king, he would have already left." The woman asked if it was because of the rumor they had heard before. The man in turn questioned if it was true that Ellen Manisil's son. As the man spoke, someone descended from the carriage. It was Ellen Manisil, dressed in black and white clothes with his hair loose. He stepped down and smiled, thinking his new disciple had prepared something very kind for him. He remembered the young prince's request for him to arrive exactly at 9:30. He had also been instructed that he would need to pass through the open door at that time. Ellen wondered if His Highness was trying to compete with the Brizzen family, and if so, it would not be easy. Baron was awaiting the moment to introduce the mage to the nobles and stir up the political game. Then, a man approached, expressing surprise at Mage Manassel's sudden visit. It was a group of vassals who informed him that His Highness was awaiting the mage's arrival. While having tea with an attendant, the king questioned what had been said. The king was having tea with the mage. The king questioned him, as the mage had requested a place to stay. The king asked again to confirm if the mage truly desired a place to stay in Kairos. The mage, with great tranquility, replied that he did, as he needed a place to stay in Kairos. The king then pondered the mage's sudden request. To compete with Selech, the king thought he would need power like Elon Manisils. However, the king did not expect the mage to offer himself first. The king then tried to discern what Elon might be planning. While sipping his tea, Elon began to say that last night in the square. Elon said that last night in the square, he saw a black cat with red eyes. The king, somewhat confused, listened. The mage continued, explaining that the cat was intelligent and that he thought of teaching it. However, the animal had no place to stay, which surprised the king. The king asked what Elon wanted to teach the cat. Elon replied that, of course, he wanted to teach the cat magic. And not only that, but he also wished to create an environment the cat would appreciate. To carry out his plan, Elon would need to help the owner of the house and also organize his own residence. The king was astonished, as Elon seemed to know everything that was happening. Then the king asked if Elon was capable of handling all of it. Elon knew that by accepting Callian as his disciple, Brisen could not stop him, and thus he could help the prince without being blocked. He told the king that all these thoughts were, in fact, Prince Callian's invitation. The king slapped his hand on his leg, rising quickly, and said he would provide a place for the prince to stay. With a smile on his face, Elon thought that the situation was already a mess, so nothing could get worse. The king then said he was curious for one reason. He had heard that the boy was not special. Elon asked, "Not special?" In his mind, he thought that even Callian's health condition was uselessly special. It had reached the point where it was difficult to find anything normal about the prince. The king continued, saying he had heard the boy had many fears, including horses, but Elon still pursued him. The mage was surprised that the king only spoke of things he had heard from others. The king continued, saying that if Callian were special, he would have heard. Elon interrupted the king to ask a question. "Perhaps you do not know the prince's condition?" the mage asked. He continued, questioning if the king knew how important princes were. The king looked at the mage seriously. The mage had his answer. The king knew nothing about the princes. Elon said that sometimes attention could be a poison, and indifference a remedy. But he knew very well that being busy was just an excuse, the mage concluded. The king was then astonished by what he heard, and by the mage's courage. He said he would consider Elon's attitude of not knowing his place as a concern coming from Callian's teacher. Walking towards the door, the king said it was ridiculous to have to explain it, but he valued the princes greatly, especially Callian, who was precious to him. He finished speaking while holding the doorknob. The king began to say it was better to end that conversation, but even before he finished, Elon snapped his fingers. Then, a silent spell was cast around them, which startled the king. Elon caught the king's attention and told him to stop stalling. The king asked what Elon was doing and how he could use magic in the royal palace. Elon began to explain details about Callian. His lips were dry, he was breathless, his skin had a bluish tint, and his fingernails appeared purplish underneath. His clothes were clearly arranged in a hurry, and considering they had been ready for a month, Callian must have lost a lot of weight. He tried to stand, unable to lift his body. With his eyes closed, he felt dizzy. The king was frightened by so many facts Elon was revealing. Elon continued, saying that if the king remained merely a spectator, he would lose everything. A maid approached Jan, who was at the prince's chamber door. She said it was almost lunchtime and the prince had not yet had his morning tea. So Jan took the tea from her and said he would be careful if the prince coughed. He entered the room and saw that the prince was still sleeping in his bed. The prince seemed very tired and appeared very thin. Jan then thought that the previous day had been a bit difficult for the prince. As Jan was about to wake the prince, Elon appeared behind him, asking if the prince was still not awake. Jan then noticed the mage's presence and, at first, did not even understand what had happened. But soon after, he was startled, throwing the tea tray upwards and reprimanding the mage for appearing out of nowhere like that. Jan asked how Mr. Manisil could act that way. Elon replied, saying that strangers could not enter the palace without permission. "So you teleport because you didn't have permission?" Jan asked. The mage replied that it was a rift, which was more difficult, and that he was very skilled with magic. Jan then regained his composure and told Elon to leave, as the prince's health was not... Before he could finish his sentence, Elon approached Jan, asking if he did not know him. Elon said that Jan came to Reberin a few years ago. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize you just because you grew up?" Elon asked. Elon called him Baby Elephant, which left Jan deeply surprised. Jan recalled that his father had said no one would suspect his true identity. With an astonished expression, Jan thought he had been discovered, and very quickly, it seemed. At that moment, Prince Baron woke up, interrupting the dialogue. He asked how long he had slept. Before answering, Jan informed the prince that he had a guest. Prince Baron asked who it was as he stood up. Upon seeing Ellen in his room, he called him teacher. Ellen then handed the prince a small red pouch containing something inside. Prince Baron untied the knot to open it and asked what it was. Baron poured some small pellets into his hands, while Ellen instructed him to eat one per day, without forgetting. Baron asked if it was medicine. Ellen explained that the prince was currently facing two problems. The first was that the prince couldn't control his mana, and the second was that his body was losing weight very rapidly. Prince Baron commented that even without him saying anything, Ellen could perfectly perceive what was happening. Ellen asked if Baron possessed the power of the blessing. The prince confirmed, explaining that this power granted healing ability and an affinity for magic. Baron recalled that, although it seemed so, even this healing power had disappeared, remembering when he had hurt his hand. He asked Ellen if perhaps there was a problem with his heart. Ellen then seriously asked if Baron had never thought of it as a strange combination. This left the prince pensive. Baron said that he had already wondered if the power of the blessing strengthened his heart, since the origin of mana and life resided there. Ellen confirmed the prince's question, stating that the power of the blessing truly strengthened the heart. With a serious look, Ellen declared that Baron's blessing power had not disappeared, his heart had not failed, and his mana had not been blocked. Curious, the prince asked what it was then. Ellen questioned him if he had never thought about it. What if Sisfanian's blessing hasn't disappeared but is being used to its limits somewhere else? Ellen asked. The young prince was surprised by Ellen's words and thought that the power of the blessing was being affected to the point where it couldn't even heal small wounds. Frightened, Baron asked Ellen if it could be some poison in his body. If it weren't for the blessing, you would already be dead, the mage said. Terrified by all this, the prince merely heard Ellen say that healing such deadly poisons exerted immense pressure, and the healing power was at its limit. Furthermore, Baron had tried to use mana in that state. Because of this, his heart ended up rejecting its use. Baron became pensive about what was happening to that body. Originally, Callian was to be assassinated, but he had already been poisoned before Baron possessed his body. It wasn't something planned shortly before it was carried out, Baron thought. Filled with anger, Baron thought, why did they have to hang a child who was going to die anyway? Ellen perceived the anger the young prince was feeling. Ellen thought that wasn't the kind of bloodlust a 14-year-old should possess. What is he, really? Ellen wondered. As the mage finished his thought, Baron said that must be the antidote, holding one of the pills from the small bag. The wizard confirmed, saying it had been made in a hurry, but he was sure it would work. As Baron held the pill, he looked at Ellen with a curious gaze and asked, what if I say I'll take the poison and the antidote together? He said, holding the pill aloft. Ellen was surprised by the young prince's question. He replied that even if he took the antidote, ingesting the poison alongside it would only delay the effects. Baron said that would be enough. Surprised by the answer, Ellen questioned if Baron would truly take both and if he already knew who the culprit was. Baron affirmed he already had a clue. Baron said he believed the source of the poisoning was the tea he drank every morning, as he consumed it in front of everyone, and no one else drank tea with him. Did Callian notice what was happening to his body and reject the tea? Perhaps that's why he was murdered, Baron thought. Baron knew the situation had changed after he possessed that body, so he no longer knew what method they might use to try and eliminate him. He told Ellen that until he discovered the method, he needed to keep everything a secret. The wizard questioned if that was truly the only reason. Baron explained that if he revealed the morning tea was the problem, Yan and the other vassals would be at risk, and that was not what he wanted. The prince said the culprit had been acting regularly, so they were sure they wouldn't be caught. Sighing, Ellen assured him that the baby elephant would be fine. Baron didn't understand the reference, but the wizard merely instructed him to ignore it. Regardless, the wizard affirmed he understood Baron's situation, and then asked him what his next steps would be. In his memories, Baron recalled a man who called him a fool and said that to gain someone's trump card, one first had to offer something in return. In those moments, he thought, that's when I remember you, father. Then Baron asked Ellen to escort him out of the palace the following morning. The next morning began with shouts, someone calling for Prince Planch and demanding he wake up. The door burst open, and someone entered the prince's room in a hurry. The servants, who were still trying to wake the prince, were promptly dismissed by the person who had entered. She pulled back the veil from Planch's bed with a sudden movement. It was the queen, who inquired, it's already late to prepare for your afternoon engagements, don't you think? Planch was sitting on the bed, shirtless and with a tired expression. The queen was astonished by the strong smell of alcohol she detected. She asked if he still hadn't managed to compose himself, even after being forbidden to drink at the plaza ceremony. Calmly, Planch picked up the glass of water beside his bed and asked why she was there. He asked her to simply answer and then leave, which irritated the queen to the point of making her bite her lips. She informed him that Callian had apparently decided to take on a mentor, the 7th Circle Mage, Ellen Manasil. As Planch finished drinking his water, she added that the aristocrats were already waiting unwavering. Showing no interest, the second prince asked what that had to do with him. The queen then abruptly approached Planch and, with a furious glare, told him not to waste all the resources invested in him. She ordered him to get ready immediately. "Many eyes will be watching you today," the queen told Planch. "So you had better not disappoint me," she concluded, leaving the prince's room. Planch was furious with the situation. He then hurled the glass he was holding to the floor. His vassals were startled and noticed he was bleeding. Drops of blood fell to the floor, and Planch ordered them to leave. Shouting in anger, he commanded everyone to withdraw immediately. In his mind, Callion's smiling face, with his red eyes, flashed. The second prince was furious about the situation. The royal family paraded through the kingdom, while the king was cheered by the people. They congratulated him, and he waved in thanks. Inside the carriage, the queen merely observed the euphoric crowd. Close behind came the three princes, elegant on their horses. A child on his father's shoulders was happy to see all the princes. His father commented that the one riding furthest back was the one he most wished to see. It was Prince Callion, in his red attire that enhanced the beauty of his eyes. Callion's servant, who was leading his horse, called out to him with a question. With a worried look, he asked about the prince's health that day. He then expressed relief that his appearance was much better than the day before. The prince, with a smile on his face, replied that it was because he had rested well. He thought it might be because he had taken the antidote the previous day, and the pain in his heart had considerably lessened. The servant mentioned that there were many plans for the day: a parade, horseback riding, then a ball. Callion then replied that the servant worried too much. He affirmed that he was better, and would be able to handle all the engagements without a problem. A hooded man was seen hiding in the middle of the crowd. He was concealed in an alley. The prince observed the man, and something caught his attention. The prince tried to recognize those people, as he had never seen them around. He remembered the war that had killed him, and then the man who had saved his life in that conflict. It was the same man who was now in the alley before him. The prince was astonished, wondering if that truly was Kyrie. Then, he was certain it was Kyrie. His horse, Baron, also noticed Kyrie's presence there. The prince thought, wondering what Kyrie would be doing in Karis. The horse tried to go towards Kyrie, but the prince's servant held it by the reins, preventing it from leaving the street. The prince then ordered them to move forward. As the hooded men turned their backs to leave, the servant wondered if there had been something important there. Baron merely watched the men walk away. The prince stroked his horse, attempting to calm him. With a smile on his face, he told Baron, "You felt it too, didn't you? But we cannot go now," he concluded, as the men disappeared from his sight. Callion then recalled his past, the day he died. He remembered the smile on Kyrie's face as he sacrificed himself to save his life. As the royal family paraded down the red carpet, a man approached to greet them. It was Melfir Paloon, the owner of the Emporium, who had prepared an equestrian show in place of the Romaine family. Callion thought this did not concern him, as it was thanks to this event that he had been dragged into a useless war of nerves. He recalled that Prince Randall was injured, and Baron Paloon was hanged on the same day during this equestrian show. Meanwhile, Paloon, smiling, indicated the way for the royal family. Upon reaching the venue, he showed them the seats he had specially prepared. Observing the surroundings, the prince noticed the chandelier. He remembered that this was the chandelier that would fall on Prince Randall. Callion found it strange that the guards had not checked something so large, especially with the king and the Papal Knights present. Speaking of knights, he recalled that annoying commander. Callion, with a faint smile, was thoughtful. As Paloon guided them, Callion pondered whether he should give him a chance to live. The prince knew that a man like Paloon would not miss the chance to win over the king. The servant told Callion to call him if he needed anything. Callion then declared that he felt uncomfortable with the chandeliers above. He turned his back, walked away, and instructed Paloon to examine them. Paloon was astonished by the prince's request. He then merely observed the chandelier, not quite understanding the reason. The equestrian show began. Horses and their highly skilled riders performed acrobatics. Someone, with clasped hands and great apprehension, thought that one day this glory would come to him. It was Paloon, who was very happy to be near His Majesty. He had prepared extensively and could not lose this opportunity. Then something behind him caught his attention. It was Prince Callion, a little bored with the entire presentation. Paloon remembered the prince's request and went to check the ropes. With the ropes in his hands, Paloon was startled by what he saw. The rope was indeed in a very precarious state, almost snapping. He thought about what would have happened if the prince had not warned him. Certainly the outcome would have sealed Paloon's fate. As he observed the prince, Polun wondered, how could he have known about the rope in the first place? Polun concluded that the prince was astute enough to understand the situation and choose what was good for himself. He, however, still wondered what made the Baron such a terrible enemy in the eyes of the Romains. Then, Polun noticed the second prince. He was astonished, as Planch did not take his eyes off him. Meanwhile, Prince Planch merely observed Polun with his usual gaze. Planch then told Polun to know his place and called him an insect. Concurrently, the event's presenter continued his show with great joy. Upstairs, in the royal family's box, the atmosphere was about to become tense. Planch declared that the smell of Callion's mother's dirty blood nauseated him. Everyone heard Planch's words and was greatly astonished by them. This even caught the attention of the king, who never paid heed to what the princes said. The second prince, Callion, appeared to be greatly shaken by Planch's words, but in truth, he gave a wicked smile, for Planch had spoken at the worst possible moment. Callion had not expected Planch to be so useful. The king then turned forward and left Celeste to handle the situation, to see how she would fare. Behind her fan, which covered her face, Kelisse was on edge, thinking she had already warned Planch before. She glanced at Planch with a furious look, and Prince Planch appeared quite calm about it all. This startled the queen, who thought Planch had done it all on purpose. Of all times, why today? She pondered. Rumors quickly spread that Planch had uttered unacceptable words in the king's presence. People grew concerned, as they could no longer openly support Planch, given that Callion had won the mage's loyalty. It was then possible that Callion would be chosen as the next heir to the throne. Thus, the people could not stand idly by. The moment to decide where their support would go was approaching. The spectacle concluded without any incident. Randall averted the unfortunate incident, and the king did not reprimand Planch for his audacity and disrespect. Callion then thought that things were certainly working in his favor, but Celeste seemed calm, considering her plan had been completely ruined. As Callion watched the queen, he wondered if she wasn't the mastermind behind it all. Memories of his past life flooded his mind. A man asking what he thought of the accident Callion had now prevented. Baron then said it was probably meant to eliminate one of the three princes. For what other reasons could it be? He asked, and the man did not reply. The man was Callion's brother, who had called him for a wager. Baron said he had already lost many times and didn't even know how much he owed him. As they played chess, Callion's brother gave him a hint. He asked if Baron didn't think the accident seemed staged, almost as if they were announcing that the royal family was the target. The Melfier Merchant Guild was the second largest in Kyrus. Therefore, for Renan Romain, master of the kingdom's primary merchant guild, it would be very beneficial to remove the Melfier from the game. Prince Callion asked his servant what the most important business of the Polun Merchant Guild was. Ian replied that they were known for their diamond mines. Callion then had his answer. With Polun out of the way, the Romains could take their place and seize the diamond business. Prince Callion had planned to retreat after saving Polun's life, but now he would make Polun pay for the trouble he had caused him. Meanwhile, somewhere, Polun trembled in fear. Polun then asked his servant to clear his schedule for the rest of the day, which surprised the servant, as Polun could not miss the ball. He pretended to be shocked by Planch's audacity, so that his servant would do as he asked, stating that this was the reason he would not attend today's engagements. Meanwhile, the vassals were all tidying the palace to continue the festivities. The king, seated in his chambers, appeared greatly troubled by something. He was very upset and pensive about everything that had happened. Then, he remembered the mage's words, that if he continued as he was, Callion would be just the first of many losses he would suffer. Planch's words also came to his mind, saying he felt disgust at the smell of Callion's mother's dirty blood. Many memories flooded the king's mind. Now, it was a red-haired woman calling him by his name. It was Callion's mother, once King Romain's wife. She was on her deathbed. Someone rushed into the king's chambers and startled him. The vassal said the queen requested an audience immediately. With that, the queen already entered the room and walked towards the king. One of the servants, while clearing a cup, said she would prepare tea for the madam. The queen questioned if the king had received a guest, as she had not been informed. The king raised his hand, dismissing the servant and the tea. He added that the queen would not delay, which visibly irritated her. Romain, the king, then asked the reason for Celeste's visit. As she sat down, Celeste declared that House Romain would take full responsibility for the incident. It was surprising that she would humble herself for Planch's mistake. She had certainly decided to prioritize her son's reputation. The king brought his hand to his chin, thoughtfully, and questioned, responsibility? Had she not lost any of her insolence? Responding to the king, Celeste commented that the parade that day had been quite impressive. She asked if Baron Polun did not deserve a reward for organizing such a charming event. The king replied that she seemed to have pondered the matter deeply. Then Celeste opened her fan, covering her face again, and stated that she intended to transfer to him the exclusive supplier rights of House Roman for the royal stables. She concluded with a smile. The king was astonished, wondering if she would truly give up such a lucrative investment. He then remembered his conversation with Manisil, who had said that the queen knew she would need to concede something to mitigate the damage. However, she was not yet desperate enough to withdraw the knights she had positioned in the palace. The mage continued, explaining that she would create a proposal she considered a fair reward. As soon as she did, show her that his majesty is willing to turn a blind eye, the mage concluded. Then, the king crossed his legs with a much calmer look and declared, Planch and I will enter the ballroom together tonight. This left the queen very surprised and, at the same time, happy. With a smile on her face, she said that he would be very pleased with this gesture. As per the agreement, Roman and Planch entered the ballroom side by side, and Baron Paloon was named the exclusive supplier for the royal stables. Everyone knew it was the result of Celeste's maneuver to secure her son's reputation. It was unthinkable that House Roman would suffer such a blow. The queen was paying the price for Planche's mistake. This meant that Callian was now a significant enough threat to pressure the queen into action. In Callian's chambers, he and his servant Ian were impressed. With a pile of gifts in his room, Callian commented that the people definitely did not hesitate to switch sides. While his servant asked what to do with the gifts, the prince was content just to see Planche and the Romans losing influence. Callian then replied that he wished to prevent his hierarchy from being occupied by traitors, and instructed them to return all gifts except those from the Arcane Enclave and Paloon. As he walked to leave his chambers, he asked them not to forget to create a list of the senders. As he left, Callian noticed a gift that caught his attention. It was a very large, very brilliant jewel necklace with all red gems. This not only astonished the prince, but also all the vassals present in the room. Then, Callian asked if it was a horse collar. He said it was quite specific, and asked if Ian had said anything. Ian replied that he had only mentioned that the young man liked Raven. It was an unexpected gift. Callian wondered, a jewel for a horse and none for the master? He thought he was being tested. Accepting that gift would mean allowing the sender to settle the life debt. The sender would then send another treasure, this time for the prince, and consider the favor fully paid. Then, the young man, with a smirk, thought it would not be so quick. He would not be satisfied with a simple jewel. Callian instructed his servant to find out the cost of the necklace and send the money to Poloon. He then asked if they were buying it. The prince replied that they were not buying it, as it was unique. While pointing to a carnivorous plant, Callian said that the prize for originality went to it. Ian took the gift to check the sender. It was from the Arcana Enclave. The prince, astonished, exclaimed, "Sorcerers and their sense of aesthetics." As Callian picked up a paper to read, his servant said it was quite rare and came with some instructions. It was a magical flower that spread bioluminescent pollen after death, popular among herbologists. At first, the prince seemed not to understand the reason for the gift, but then something sparked in his mind, and he smiled as if he had understood. His servant then asked if he should send it back to the Enclave. The prince replied that no, they would keep it. While the maid tidied his room, the young man seemed to have an idea. Suddenly, a cry from Ian caught the maid's attention, and caught. In the background, Ian asked if everything was all right, and the prince replied that it was, that it had merely slipped from his hand. The teacup had fallen, spilling all its contents onto the floor. Ian instructed one of the maids to clean the mess. As she cleaned the prince's clothes, he noticed that the tea had hit the flour. The flour was partially covered by the tea liquid. While the maid cleaned, Ian asked if that would harm the plant. The prince replied loudly and clearly that no, it would not, because the tea was not poisoned. The prince's words surprised the maid. He then asked them to leave the flower pot where it was, as he had grown fond of it. Two men rode their horses, and one of them thanked the other for taking time out of his busy schedule. They were the prince and the mage. The mage said he could not refuse, especially while the young man risked his life. The mage commented that the prince seemed much happier outside than inside the palace. The prince agreed. He was about to say it was his first time, but he changed the phrase, stating that he was seeking amusement. He needed to remember that he was Callian, and no longer Baron. He asked the mage if he had truly obtained His Majesty's permission for that excursion. The mage replied that His Majesty should be receiving the request at that very moment. Baron was not surprised by the mage's attitude, stating that he felt as guilty as the mage. He remembered the escape he had made from Ian to go with the mage, who then said that the prince was his apprentice. The prince was pleased and said he would consider that a compliment. Manisil asked if he was taking the antidote regularly. Baron then looked at the mage with a serious expression and replied that he was. Furthermore, he had taken a dose earlier that day and was feeling much better now, so much so that the poisoner was starting to panic. All the pieces would fall into place when they walked into the trap, the prince concluded. The mage said he admired his creativity, suggesting that perhaps the prince had never needed him. The prince, however, replied that it was not true. With a smile on his face, the prince stated that nothing would have been possible without the interesting gift the mage had sent. Upon reaching a certain point in the kingdom, they stopped their horses. The mage then turned his horse in the opposite direction from the prince's. He said he would go that far, where he would leave him. The mage thought he should go with the apprentice, but decided to let him do as he wished. The prince then, pulling his hood over his head, said he knew the mage would understand him. Manasil mentioned that there was a magic shop on Tainancha Street and asked the prince to meet him there when he finished his work. Starting to spur his horse, the prince said he would meet him there and wished good luck to both of them. Both then departed in opposite directions. Next, a robust man was seen forging a sword. The prince held the sword in his hands, raising it before his face where the blade reflected his red eye. Riding out from there on his horse, he thought that would be enough. He sheathed the sword and concluded that he would manage with it until his custom order was ready. Standing in a dark alley a little ahead of the blacksmith's shop, he thought that to proceed from there, he only needed information. Secretia maintained a network across the continent to gather information from other nations. However, these spies did more than just collect information. Each agent underwent years of rigorous training to become an elite assassin, and the people who built this network of assassins were none other than King de Bouillon, who was Baron's father, the prince's past self. He covered his face well with his hood and proceeded down the dark alley where he spotted two seemingly drunk men. He was already near the Pigeon Post Center on Narasha Street. Baron knew how dangerous the assassins could be, as he himself had trained them. As the drunk men passed by the prince, he merely adjusted his hood so as not to be recognized. Now, being one of the princes of cares, if the assassins noticed his presence there, they would probably kidnap him or do something worse to him. Black hair and red eyes were simply too conspicuous. Baron knew it was best to maintain discretion. He then entered the Pigeon Post Center. It was a spacious place with 2 visible floors and many birds. As he walked, he realized the place was even larger than he had imagined. A young man, who appeared to be an employee, asked if he was looking for a carrier pigeon. The prince replied that he was not. Baron commented that the birds had not yet woken up, which caught the attendant's attention. The man explained that they were sleepy birds. The prince observed that they must have traveled a long distance, as they looked exhausted. The man confirmed that was why they were sleeping. While observing a bird with a key-shaped mark on its back, Baron commented that it was the animal's resting place. The man then asked what he was doing there. Baron promptly replied that he was looking for bird food. The man said he had come to the right place, but in the blink of an eye, the prince was attacked by the attendant. The attendant cut a piece from the young man's hood. With the dagger at Baron's nape, the man claimed he did not recall selling any pigeons recently. Baron thought that man was no ordinary fighter, and Callion's body was not prepared to face him. Placing his hand on the man's dagger and lowering it, the prince said it was obvious he had not sold any birds, as Baron had just arrived in that kingdom. The man merely observed him with a calm and tranquil gaze. There, birds meant spies, and birdseed meant information. Secretian spies kept their identities hidden, even from their allies, to prevent mission compromise should one of them be captured. The man then asked whose spy he was. The prince gave a half smile, showing his composure. He knew they would have no way of knowing, even though he had used his father's name, Nebulade, to disguise himself as a Secretian spy. Baron then replied that he was one of Nebulade's spies. The man was greatly astonished by his declaration. This made Callion the first Ceresian prince in history to spy on his own kingdom. Calmly, Baron said that if that was settled, he would like to receive some information, as he had just left the nest. The man then opened a secret passage. He told the young man to follow him as he walked ahead. As Baron carefully observed the tunnel, the man said they would meet often there, and that Baron could call him White Falcon. The young man replied that he could call him Red Swan. The man then said he would certainly remember that name. They arrived at a place filled with books, and the man asked what kind of feed he was looking for. Baron said he was looking for an item and a piece of information. The man then informed him that it would cost 8 florins. He emphasized that payment was up front, which surprised the prince. Baron thought the man did not even know what kind of information he was seeking, and wondered if he was trying to confuse him. The man replied, without even being asked, that they charged a fixed fee, in case he was wondering. He then handed the young man an item and a piece of information. Taking the paper, Baron opened it and began to read, asking if White Falcon was sure that was the correct location. White Falcon then said it was the only place that met his request. The prince thanked him for the help. As Baron was about to leave, the man told him to be careful. This caught Baron's attention, as the man did not seem like someone who cared about others' well-being. The falcon then said that it was not exactly the safest place. Then, the prince, opening the door, agreed with him. "Of all the dangerous things in this place, I am sure nothing is more dangerous than you, White Falcon," Baron thought. The prince then continued his journey in search of his desired destination. Near the bridge he needed to cross, there was a group of people. Baron wondered what they were doing there and tried to pass unnoticed. But then, his horse was startled by something. The prince tried to calm his horse, which seemed inexplicably frightened. A man from the group approached the young prince. He explained that the dead were embarking on their final journey and asked the prince to wait a moment if he was not in a hurry. The prince, not immediately understanding the meaning of the journey of the dead, looked at the river and realized it was a farewell ceremony. Dismounting his horse, the prince stated that he could wait, as he did not wish to disturb the final journey of the deceased. Each nation has its own way of bidding farewell to the deceased. The Ceresians, for example, believe that souls leave the world in red flowers, carried by the river. It is said that crossing bridges, while the flowers pass, diverts souls from their correct course. In his homeland, Secretia, they placed sinistar flowers on graves to mourn the dead. The white petals of the sinistars wither at sunrise and bloom in purple hues under the night sky. They serve as a reminder that the living and the dead, like day and night, will forever be separated. This rite provides closure for the Secretians as they bid farewell to their loved ones. Baron waited patiently for the entire rite to conclude. In his thoughts, Prince Baron wondered if his brother had placed a sinistar flower on his grave, or if he had used the Arcus Tempest before that. Then an idea arose in his mind. He himself might be a lost soul, diverted to the wrong path. The man who had asked the prince to wait for the rite thanked him for his patience and said that he could now continue on his way. The young prince merely observed without saying a word. He mounted his horse, thinking that the past did not matter, for he was now the Prince of Kyrus. Then, the prince removed his hood and told the man that the souls could now travel peacefully and that they should rest in peace. The man was astonished to see the prince's face. The prince then continued on his way, crossing the bridge. As the man watched him leave, another person called his attention to conclude the rite. She asked if anything had happened, and he replied that nothing had. That man was Arson, the High Magistrate of Valkanum. He was the man who had caused Baron's death when Baron was the Prince of Secretia. Arson then removed his hood and told his companion that the man he had been speaking with seemed to be a good person. "Every shop I've passed so far has been named Cispanian," Baron thought. In front of a tavern also called Cispanian, he murmured that it was truly incredible. After all, the spies who had always claimed that Ceres was full of Cispanian followers were not wrong. Baron entered the tavern, and a man greeted him, welcoming him and offering to find a table. The young prince replied that it was not necessary. He said that he had business on the 4th floor, pointing upwards. The man was visibly surprised by the answer. With a slightly choked voice, he agreed, and opened the door for the prince to enter. The man then showed the way, with the prince following close behind. The man opened a door and wished him a pleasant time. Callian entered a completely empty room, furnished only with tables and chairs. He noticed a coat rack attached to the wall that had an unusual detail. Callian then remembered the information he had bought from the White Falcon. It was the location of the Criminal Activity Center in the royal capital of Ceres. The prince held the coat rack and, turning it to the left, activated the mechanism. This mechanism opened a secret door, right next to the coat rack. Asking to be taken to the 4th floor of this 2-story building was the password to access the place. This meant that the upper floors were merely a facade for a hidden basement underground. As he descended the stairs, he continued to think that the establishment he sought was not the gambling house on the 3rd floor, where small sums were wagered, but rather what lay hidden even further below. The prince reached a door and slowly opened it. Inside, men fought fiercely against each other. It appeared to be a fighting ring, with many people around watching the match. This was exactly where the prince wanted to be. The surrounding crowd fervently clamored for the fighters to caress each other with more vigor. They had bet on the one who would prove more affectionate. Then, the announcer bellowed that there was a victor. Another victory for Gerard, the affectionate. "Payment tickets will be distributed shortly," the announcer declared. "Those who bet on the white side, do not forget to collect your winnings." As the defeated fighter was dragged out of the ring, the crowd vehemently cursed him. Standing in a corner, the prince thought, "The strong smell makes the air suffocating, and the screams belong to those who have abandoned their humanity," he concluded, observing the chaos. What a repulsive sight. A man approached Baron, catching his attention and informing him that he had forgotten to pay. Baron made the payment, and the man called one of the attendants to lead him to table 27. A very beautiful young woman with blue hair and a red dress approached the prince. She took him by the arm and gestured for him to follow her. The prince wondered if she had difficulty speaking. The young woman then turned turned, and Callian managed to notice her ear. The prince was astonished, for her ear was mutilated. It doesn't seem like they are wearing these clothes by choice, the prince thought. And the tracking collars on their necks, he observed. He was immersed in thoughts about how they were kept under constant surveillance. Then the young woman nudged him. She pointed at him and then at a tray, as if asking if he wished to bet. Baron reached into his pocket, thinking he should probably place a bet. I will also play along until I get what I came for here, he thought, placing his money on the black side of the tray. The rules were simple in places like this. Money was wagered on the fighters, and the winning side received double. You bet 3, you leave with 6. If you bet 6, you will receive 12, and so on, with sufficient winnings. Next, the winner of the 10th fight of the night was announced. Pantheron of the Steel Legs. Again, the announcer declared that payment tickets would be distributed shortly. Those who bet on the black side, please do not forget to collect your winnings. Everyone was astonished, for Baron's 3 florins had transformed into 1536. People watched that amount of money on the table and whispered among themselves. Baron then thought that they were not there for the money. The final fight of the night. Win 4 times more. That's right, the special fight everyone has been waiting for, announced the announcer. On the white side, Sean, the Raging Hammer. And on the black side, the stubborn challenger, the Unwavering. The prince was very surprised when he saw who the challenger was. In a memory, Callian saw the man say that he was a fighter in the arenas, forced to spill the blood of others for money, until his little sister died, and that changed his destiny. Then the announcer shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you," while the man seemed to warm up for the match. "Do you wish to be a knight, Kyrie?" someone asked. He replied with his hand on his chest, "Not a knight, my prince, but a sword. My desire is to be your blade." Baron remembered his last moment in life, when he told him to grab his sword and not give up. Then Kyrie was announced in the ring, and the announcer called him the Demonic Eye. Quickly, the young prince took his coins and placed them on the tray. He shouted, saying that he would bet everything on the black side. The attendant was shocked by his decision. The entire venue was astonished that he had bet everything he had on that man. People wondered if he was stupid or just completely insane. He just smiled as if he knew what he was doing. Then the announcer shouted, "With 0 victories, Kyrie has not yet triumphed in the arena. Will he rewrite his history today?" Someone asked the young prince if he was sure he wanted to throw his money away like that. It was a tall, blonde man, sitting a little ahead, who turned to Baron. The man told him to place his chips on another fighter, because the one he bet on had never won a single fight. Baron then asked the attendant next to him if she had already counted his chips. He confirmed again that his bet was on the black side and asked her to confirm. The man then became a little annoyed and said that he was just trying to warn him, as it wasn't his money at stake. "The Raging Hammer rarely allows his opponents to leave intact," said the announcer. While the entire crowd cheered fiercely, Kyrie watched the rookie who had bet everything he had on him. Warming up for the fight, Kyrie's opponent declared that another rookie bettor would go hungry, because of a mongrel who refuses to give up the ring. The 2 fighters faced each other, and the start of the combat was announced. Before his chains even touched the ground, Kyrie's opponent quickly leaped towards him. The Raging Hammer immediately began his attack, and Kyrie defended himself to protect his head. As Kyrie defended, a new attack came from the left. However, Kyrie managed to block that blow as well, protecting himself. The swift Raging Hammer provoked, claiming that Kyrie was too slow, and landed a kick to Kyrie's stomach, throwing him backward, making him spit strawberry juice. While the crowd clamored for the Raging Hammer to finish the fight, Baron, incredulous at the scene, slammed his hand on the table. With an angry look, Baron thought that Kyrie was merely a punching bag without his sword. This should be easy for him. Why is he getting beaten up? Baron questioned. Kyrie tried to land a punch, but his slowness allowed his opponent to mock him. Raging Hammer retaliated with a powerful punch, ordering Kyrie to give up. Raging Hammer continued to strike Kyrie relentlessly, declaring that this would be his end. As Raging Hammer prepared to deliver what seemed to be the final blow, Baron rose from his chair and shouted, calling out to Kyrie and catching his attention. Baron then yelled at Kyrie to lower his shoulder. Moments before the blow landed, Kyrie heard the instruction, but he did not understand why. So, as the blow was about to reach him, Kyrie lowered his shoulder and dodged Raging Hammer's powerful punch. He continued to crouch, as if to gain momentum. Kyrie prepared his fist to strike his opponent. Baron, satisfied that Kyrie had managed to dodge, watched intently. Then, Kyrie landed a punch on Raging Hammer's stomach with all his might. Kyrie continued to strike his opponent relentlessly, showing no signs of fatigue. With great force, Kyrie punched Raging Hammer in the face, breaking his teeth. Raging Hammer then fell to the canvas after Kyrie's powerful blow. All the spectators of the fight were stunned, as no one expected Kyrie to be able to win that match. People then questioned questioned if everyone had seen it, for it seemed like a mirage. Kyrie had defeated the feared Raging Hammer. Next, the announcer declared Kyrie's victory. All the bettors were furious with Raging Hammer, as the vast majority had bet on him. Looking at the crowd, Kyrie saw the man who had given him the tips to win. Young Prince Baron was very happy with Kyrie's victory. But even before Kyrie could celebrate his victory, a man approached from behind and asked him to come along. Baron then turned to the man who had approached Kyrie, noticing that he was a tall, very strong man with dark hair. The man said that someone wished to speak with Kyrie. Kyrie accompanied the man, who led him to a room. Sitting on the sofa, a man praised Kyrie for having made so much money with just 3 coins, while the man who had led him there remained on guard at the door. As the guard at the door slowly drew his sword from its sheath, the man on the sofa continued to emphasize the large sum of money. With a malevolent smile that revealed a gold tooth, the man on the sofa stated that a child like Kyrie should not handle such a large amount of money. Baron then gave a slight smile. Baron remarked that the man did not even have the decency to try and negotiate, and that he was more foolish than Baron had expected. With a furious look, Baron ordered the man to remove his hood, as he wished to see him clearly before breaking his nose. Baron, holding the hood, questioned if the man was sure of his decision. This hood might be the only thing keeping them out of trouble, the prince warned. The man, with an air of curiosity, gestured for his henchmen to approach and remove the hood. 2 burly thugs advanced towards the young prince. One of them reached out for the young prince's hood, saying, "Don't be ashamed. We just want to see the face you hide so much." However, the hand reaching for the hood was swiftly intercepted by a dagger. With the dagger in hand, Baron, after the attack, asked the thug, "Shouldn't people in your line of work be faster? Where is your instinct?" The chief, startled by Baron's dagger prowess, claimed he needed more time to prepare the money. Baron, maneuvering the dagger, told the chief to keep his gold. In return, he would take Kyrie, and he pointed the dagger at the chief. The chief argued that his master would not be pleased, as the boy, Kyrie, had just started earning his keep. "You are mistaken if you think I will accept this ridiculous proposal," the chief thought. "Perhaps you know how to defend yourself in a fight, but we have the numerical advantage here," he concluded, observing the young man. Meanwhile, Baron kept his dagger pointed at the chief. The chief declared that he would not hand over Kyrie. Suddenly, he was startled by something that came his way. The chief's table was cut, and part of his pants as well. The young man then said, "You can keep the gold and your life." With the dagger in hand, exuding mana, Baron asked the chief if he now had his attention. The chief, overcome by fear and despair, asked if that was a sword aura. He pointed at a thug, shouting for him to get out of there and bring Kyrie. Callian hoped he would not have to repeat such a demonstration, for as expected, Callian's body could not withstand the strength of that aura for long. Soon, the thug who had gone to fetch Kyrie returned, announcing a problem. The chief, still with his pants cut, asked what the problem was. The thug explained that Kyrie would not leave Hina behind. The name Hina seemed to awaken something in Callian's mind. He then remembered a dialogue he had with Kyrie when the latter was still in his body. Kyrie had said that his sister had chosen death when he left the lodgings. He regretted having failed her in the end. Callian slapped the chief's shoulder, stating that he knew what to do. The chief, desperate, shouted for them to bring the girl as well. However, Callian declared that he would like to fetch her personally. While the chief assured him that no one would bother him on the way, Callian extended his hand towards him. The chief did not understand the meaning of that gesture. Callian, with a mocking air, told the chief to reimburse him the 3 florins and the entrance fee. Outside the establishment, Callian and his horse waited, while Kyrie and Hina stood a little behind them. Hina appeared quite frightened, not understanding what was happening. Kyrie then embraced Hina to protect her. Kyrie thanked Callian for getting them out of that place. Callian said nothing. He merely watched from the corner of his eye. Kyrie expressed that he did not know why Callian was helping them, while something rapidly approached. In the blink of an eye, Callian took off his coat and covered Hina, saying that with him, they could lower their guard. He stated that he did not wish to harm them. Kyrie became very frightened upon seeing the young man without his hood covering his face, for he had recognized that it was Prince Callian. He bowed his head slightly, apologizing and saying that they should have recognized him sooner. Callian placed his hand on Kyrie's shoulder and told him to raise his head. He added that they did not need to bow before him. Half-elf siblings without a coin in their pockets. Callian could imagine the kind of past they had endured. In the previous timeline, Kyrie had failed to protect his sister. You tend to expose your shoulders in a fight, a common habit among those who have just begun training with a sword. The prince asked, "Do you wish to be a knight? Is that why you hone your sword skills?" Kyrie replied that he did not aspire to be a knight, but rather a blade destined to protect everyone. The answer surprised the young prince. Callian then handed a sword to Kyrie, explaining that to become the blade he desired, he would need to serve as his shield. This was the condition for Callian to teach him the art of the sword, and Kyrie should seek him out once he made a decision. Kyrie asked why the prince was being so kind to them. With a slight smile, Callian replied that he needed a sharp blade. In his thoughts, however, Callian considered it the least he could do to thank his old companion. Meanwhile, Tenanxian Street was deserted, as it was already late at night. There stood the office of the Mages Association. Manasil read the mage's report sent to the cavalry performance. The prince is concerned about Paloon and asked that we keep him under surveillance. Paloon had found a cut rope at the last banquet, Manasil finished reading, as he set fire to the letter. As the letter burned, Manasil watched the flames, wondering how his apprentice knew all of it. Just then, Prince Callian arrived, sweaty and with his clothes crumpled. With a smile of relief on his face, he announced his arrival. The mage Manasil observed him from head to toe, noticing his state. "Did you get into a fight, your highness?" the mage asked. The prince sat down and replied that there had been some unforeseen events. As the mage went to prepare some tea, he remarked that the young prince appeared to have had a hectic day. "It was a long day," Callian replied. "I gathered some information and also set a trap in Dorsey's company." As he stretched, the prince wondered why the mage seemed so worried, and not simply impressed with what he had accomplished in such a short time. The mage merely watched him as he prepared the tea. When the prince saw how the mage prepared the tea, he was astonished. Everything was done with magic. Finally, he was in a true mage's office. The mage noticed Callian was euphoric and asked if he expected some kind of magic potion with an eye inside. The prince replied, "Almost." As he finished answering the mage's question, Callian looked at the table and saw a dull dagger, commenting that it didn't match the decor. He looked more closely at the dagger, and something caught his eye. It was the dagger he had acquired earlier. The mage then asked what the prince's dagger was doing there. With a tone of surprise, Callian said it shouldn't be there. Quickly, the dagger began to fly, startling him. Then the dagger flew towards the prince's chest. With the dagger almost hitting him, Callian realized it was too late to escape. The mage merely watched everything, arms crossed. The mage then commented that, even with that weak body, Callian had been truly fast. The prince managed to dodge, using aura on his own dagger. Before the dagger even hit the floor, it flew back up, while the mage explained that it was a magical artifact created by Suspanion. "It reveals a copy of the opponent's hidden weapons," the mage concluded, holding the dagger. "A kind of warning, don't you think?" the mage asked. The prince was panting because using his mana was always painful. Callian thought that this must be just a test, and he had acted rashly, doing more than necessary. The mage asked how that could be more than necessary if Callian didn't even know how to properly hold a sword. The prince remained seated on the sofa with his hand on his chest, still panting. Then, the mage touched his shoulder and began to speak about the day they met. The encounter with the prince had not gone as desired, but the mage knew that, little by little, things had started to become strange. The mage showed conversations he had had with the king, in which the monarch mentioned that the nobles were amazed by Callian's change, and also conversations with the queen, who said that, upon discovering he was poisoned, Callian showed more will to live than fear of death. "That feeling could only belong to someone who had already shed much blood," the mage quoted. Furthermore, the mage already knew that an incident would occur at the cavalry performance. The mage asked if the prince could explain everything to him. As the healing magic accelerated his body's regeneration, the prince felt a rapid improvement. During his recovery, Baron questioned if the mage distrusted him, but soon concluded that the man was merely seeking to establish trust. Slamming his hand on the table, Baron declared he was not Callian. His true name, he revealed, was Baron Secretia. The two men sat facing each other. The mage asked Baron to first confirm if the true Prince Callian was dead. Baron shook his head, explaining that it wasn't exactly like that. At first he had doubts, but now he was certain that Callian was still alive, and that he could feel his presence. The mage then recalled that on the day they first met, Callian had said the throne was not what he desired. He asked Baron what he truly wanted. Calmly, Baron replied that his desire was to prevent wars. He still didn't know why Kyrie wanted the axis of time, but he feared that if some underlying cause remained, everything would repeat itself. Therefore, he wanted to uncover the reason behind everything. The mage, with serenity, asked if what Baron desired was for the good of Chase, the legitimate heir, or for his own interest as Baron. Baron didn't understand the question and asked the mage what he meant. The mage replied that, first and foremost, Baron needed to know something crucial. Currently, Secretia only had Prince Chase. He explained that Chase was the son of a concubine, but the queen could not have children. Therefore, Baron had no way of existing there. The revelation deeply surprised Baron, who was in Prince Callion's body. Baron felt immersed in an extreme void, completely lost. Lost in thought, he wondered if he truly didn't exist, neither in Secretia nor anywhere else. The prince was deep in his thoughts and fears, questioning why and how it had happened. Callion's body was in perfect condition, but Baron felt something strange deep down. The prince confessed that sometimes he wondered if someone had entered his body, just as he himself had entered Callion's. He added, "As long as I am alive, there cannot be another Baron." The young man seemed sad about the whole situation. He knew that, deep down, his situation was no different from stealing someone's life. Then, the mage tried to explain Secretia's situation, stating that Chase was the sole heir to the throne. He said, "You must know that the past and present are not the same, and the future may have been altered." The mage continued, "The three princes of Kyrus are in mortal danger, unlike you, the prince of Secretia, who grew up with the best of friends." The mage maintained a serious expression, while Baron, in Callion's body, was surprised. The mage added that this meant they shouldn't be bound by the past. Baron decided to clarify things with the mage, stating that what he feared would not happen. He revealed that on the first day he came to Kyrus, as soon as he opened his eyes, at that exact moment, he had given up living as Baron. Baron's words left the mage very surprised, as he had not expected such a declaration. Baron asked if the mage was truly fine with the whole situation, even with him not being the crown prince of Kyrus. With a smile on his face, the mage said that Baron had nothing to worry about, and that he could guarantee him that, from the beginning, only one person had a connection with him and the priest. Already mounted on their horses, Baron wondered if the wizard knew about the Arcus Tempest from the beginning. He decided to ask if the wizard had extensive knowledge about the temporal axis. The wizard merely maintained a serious expression as he rode beside Baron. The wizard began to explain that the previous year, in that same month, Prince Chase had sought him out, seeking advice about the temporal axis. The wizard himself infiltrated Secretia, but he could not find any information other than that the axis had not been made by a man. Last month, he received a letter from Secretia about the axis's disappearance, precisely when Baron said he had gone back 10 years in time. Baron was astonished to realize that he had traveled back in time at the same time the temporal axis vanished. Baron suggested that perhaps this was the reason for the disappearance. Before Baron even finished speaking, the wizard interrupted him, stating that although it was a significant problem, they still did not have the answer. He revealed, however, that there was someone they could ask, a person who knew more than the wizard himself and who would soon meet the prince. This person was Cispanian, as previously mentioned. Prince Callion merely agreed with the wizard's decision. His rite of passage was approaching, a ceremony that occurs when a new member joins the Cispanian royalty, and it is at this moment that everyone learns the Cispanian will. The wizard emphasized that the priority was to be alive to complete the rite of passage, asking the prince to do whatever was necessary. Baron probably replied, "Even if I fail, the seeds that were planted have already begun to sprout." Back at the palace in his chambers, Callion's servant expressed great concern about the prince's departure. The prince was examining the plant he had received from the wizard and seemed to have noticed something. Meanwhile, his servant advised him to wash his face before going to bed. With a smile on his face, the prince asked his servant if he wanted to see something interesting. Then they headed to the palace terrace. It was early morning, and it was cold. "The plant we received as a gift from the Mage's society, being extremely rare, possesses characteristics unknown to most," the prince thought. "That day, I feigned an accident and ended up spilling poison into the flower pot, unnoticed by anyone, and I observed the servant's reactions during that time. An ordinary person wouldn't survive 7 days with that poison, much less a plant. However, this plant remained alive, as if someone had deliberately swapped it." On the terrace, Ian, the servant, spotted something quite bright and drew the prince's attention. He was captivated by the intensity of the glow. A luminous trail formed across the palace courtyard. If they swapped it, it wouldn't be easy to get rid of the pot. They would have to keep it in a safe place, the prince mused. "And so, he will know the truth," he concluded. "Of course, the owner of Hestia Palace," the prince thought. "May Celestia await him." The next day dawned rainy. The prince watched the rain fall from the sky through his window. Someone entered his room, and he turned to see who it was. It was Ian, who brought tea and was greeted with a "good morning." The prince asked Ian if he had slept well the previous night. Callion seemed to be in excellent spirits, with a healthy complexion and a cheerful face. Ian, somewhat surprised, confirmed that he had slept well and asked if His Highness had also had a good night's sleep. Placing the tea tray on the table, Ian remarked that it was a bit strange to hear the prince ask about his sleep first, and added that Callion had woken up early that day. Ian joked that it was a good sign, for today the sun will rise in the west. The prince picked up his teacup to drink. As he drank, Ian asked if the sound of the rain had woken him. "It's subtle, but I can still feel it. You increased the amount of poison, Celeste, the prince thought. He asked Ian if there would be any event next week where all the nobles would be present. His servant confirmed that there would be a meeting, and all the nobles, including His Majesty the King, would be there. The prince then learned that 1 week after the nobles' meeting, there would be a banquet, and that day would be the perfect opportunity for him to test the poison. So, Selish, make the most of it while you can, the prince thought. He then took the pill that the mage had given him and quickly swallowed it as if it were a piece of candy. He handed the cup back to Ian, who asked him a question. Ian wanted to know if the prince had been eating in the past few days, and Callian replied that he had only consumed nutrients. The prince, closing his pouch of pills, mentioned feeling weak and asked to go down for breakfast. Ian agreed and went to help His Highness get ready. The servant was surprised because the prince had drunk all the tea. Ian wondered why the prince was so worried. Already at the breakfast table after the incident at the theater, Planch was not present for the meal. Callian considered it much better this way, so that Planch would not ruin his plans. While the first prince, Randall, drank his wine, Callian commented that the roses would soon bloom. Randall was surprised by the remark and quickly looked at Callian, who merely smiled. They stared at each other for a brief moment. Randall rose from the table and left without finishing his meal. Ian asked, whispering, if the prince didn't find it a bit random to talk about roses during breakfast. Callian replied that it was because he saw flowers in the hallway and remembered Randall's care for roses. The servant said that didn't make much sense, and Callian simply continued to drink his coffee. Next, Prince Callian was training in the rain, in the castle garden. He was quite wet, a mixture of sweat and rain. While he leaned against a tree, panting and tired, someone approached, commenting that he seemed to get worse every day and asking what he was doing. The prince replied that if he kept avoiding physical training, it would be difficult to improve. It was his master, the mage, who had suddenly appeared. The wizard said he was talking to Lamine. The prince was surprised that he had called someone by their first name. The wizard replied that there was nothing wrong with it. It was just a common name. The wizard asked why the prince had called him there, and Callian replied that he wanted to ask for 2 things. The first was that he would need 2 identities, and the wizard said he could easily provide them. And the prince said the second thing was that he wanted to investigate the death cases involving the nobles, especially the connection to Roman, they both said together. With a smile, the wizard said that was also not a big problem, and that Callian was being kind to ask. He then asked if the prince was in a hurry. The wizard then replied that the amount of poison had increased, and he believed he had already discovered the culprit. The wizard said he already had an idea who it could be, and the prince warned that they would soon start pressuring him. I know it's difficult to lay hands on a great wizard, but the master needs an ace up his sleeve, Callian concluded. Manisil asked if Callian was, by any chance, planning to use him as a distraction. Baron, with a firm gaze, replied, not as a distraction, but as a weapon. That's right, a weapon. I know the power of wizards better than anyone. Those who killed me in my own country, the army of wizards, the white demons. He then concluded by saying that he would form a society of wizards loyal to him. Manisil was greatly astonished by the young prince's words. He explained that wizards were not like knights. They were born that way, not trained. Baron then said there was something he had not yet told him, and that it had worked in the previous timeline, which caught the wizard's attention. When King Romain first expressed the desire to establish his own society of wizards in Kyrus, everyone, including Romain's nobility, laughed. The idea was quickly dismissed, but thanks to it, the king managed to initiate the plan without attracting public attention, despite its success. Soon after the consolidation of the Wizard Society, Romain passed away due to dubious circumstances. With the king deceased, the society swore loyalty to his heir, Planch, and became a pawn in his conquest, as Manisil was already aware. But now I will not allow that to happen so easily this time, the prince said. Baron knew he had to act cautiously, as House Romain would try to thwart his plans. Baron said that the ace he had up his sleeve was the poison tea Selesh was giving him. The wizard did not understand what the young prince meant by that, and asked if Callian could provide the details. With a smile, the young prince replied that the truth would soon be revealed. The wizard, disappointed with the answer, was then advised by the prince to speak with the king, as Callian suspected the monarch had many concerns on his mind. The prince assured the wizard that he could rest easy. Kalechi is destined to make mistakes and will be forced to negotiate, the prince said. We must seize this opportunity to gain an advantage. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a maid reported, "We are applying more poison, as ordered by your majesty." Slamming her hand on the table, the queen declared that she would not permit any mistakes. Rumors are spreading among the people. This kind of gossip displeases me. Or must I continue to face this inconvenience? The queen asked. Trembling with fear, her maid replied that she would not. As they spoke at the table, a man approached. The queen commented that she had no choice, since her disobedient son refused to fulfill his responsibilities. It was Planch who approached the queen, and he appeared angry. He said that the queen was meddling and that he had come there to make that clear. The queen retorted that his opinion did not matter in this matter, as he had not taken a single action to make his future more promising. Dramatically, the queen said that, unfortunately, these were the pains of motherhood. If she had to exert herself to the utmost for her son's sake, then so be it. Then, Planch clenched his fist in great anger. Quickly, he turned his back on his mother and left her presence. As she sipped her tea, the queen thought that he was too fragile and that her path to the throne would be free of competitors. The day of the move then arrived. The day was very beautiful, and someone was humming. "Someone is in a good mood. You've been singing all day," Kyrie said. "Are you that excited?" he asked. "We are finally going to the royal palace, and that means we will be able to see the prince again," Hina replied. Kyrie asked if she liked him, and Hina said that the prince was incredible and that she could hardly wait for that night. Meanwhile, at the palace, the tailor and his assistants were preparing the prince's attire. Ian was putting the finishing touches on the details of the attire and warned that the prince had to be at the banquet in an hour. The prince said that he needed Ian to do something for him. The young man thought it was time to end this game. The weakest and youngest had been forced to drink and ended up poisoning himself, but now he would refuse elegantly and politely. Entering the banquet hall, the vassal announced the prince's arrival. He and the queen briefly stared at each other. Now was the moment to initiate a new wave of changes. Meanwhile, Ian, mounted on his horse, rode quickly. In his mind was the prince's request, who had asked him to deliver 2 letters, one to the Arcane Enclave and another to Master Allen, and that he was to deliver the enclaves first, before visiting his master. The prince had said that he would take care of himself, and that everything would be fine. Ian was a little distressed by this, as it was not the first time the prince had acted this way. While Ian finished his thought that he was worrying for no reason, the scene shifted back to the banquet, where a wine glass fell to the floor. This startled everyone present, especially the king. Someone was collapsing to the floor in front of the queen. Meanwhile, at the enclave, a purple-haired woman told Manasil that all the records he had requested were there. "The official documents themselves are enough to scour," the woman said. She was Uria Siren, head of the Cyresian Arcane Enclave. But to think that something so significant was kept secret from the public, "I don't think the nobles had a choice," the mage said. "Lesser houses wouldn't dare make enemies of House Romain," Uria concluded. "It was to save their own necks from unfortunate accidents." Uria then asked Manasil if he had any idea what Prince Callian intended with that information. Manasil became thoughtful for a moment before he replied. Suddenly the door burst open, and a voice called for Madame Uria. It was Ian, who had arrived breathless, sweating from his haste. Seeing that both recipients were present, he seemed relieved. Ian handed Prince Callian's letter to Manasil. While Manasil read the letter, Ian handed the second one to Uria. Manasil quickly stood up, grabbed his coat, and asked where that night's banquet would be held. Ian, surprised, asked where Manasil was going so suddenly, reminding him that he would need an invitation. Uria exclaimed that there was no time for formalities, as Callian's life was at stake. Ian was visibly startled by Uria's declaration. The letter revealed that night, Callian would risk his own life to force Khaleesi to negotiate, and that, if things went wrong, he was counting on Manasil to save him. An hour before these events, Callian was having tea, face to face with the queen. He suggested that they both drop their masks. Closing her fan quickly, the queen agreed. Tapping her fan on the table, the queen said that it would hardly make a difference. While calmly sipping his tea, Callian said that he was referring to dropping their masks. "And not your manners," he said, staring at the queen. "A duel of words? Is that the best you can do?" "I expected to be surprised," the queen said. She stood up, stating that she had expected more and regretted having wasted her time. A commoner like Callian, she added, would never understand the courtesy of keeping one's guests entertained. Callian merely replied that he knew about the poison. Placing the cup on the table, Callian said he had had enough and couldn't imagine acquiring a taste for it. The queen then feigned not understanding, asking what he meant. With a smile on her face, the queen said that Callian's joke had not had the desired effect. Callian asked her not to worry, for he had come prepared. There were more ways, he said, to sharpen her weakened mind. He said he wondered what he should risk to ensure she behaved, as he picked up a vial. "The only valuable thing I have is this strong heart, so I decided to risk it," the prince said. Showing the vial he had picked up, Callian said that the substance inside it stopped the heart for a brief moment. The queen then leaned on the table as Callian spoke. The prince said that neither silver spoons nor magical catalysts could detect the substance, and that it did not work on him, for his heart was protected by Suspanian's blessing. However, since the blessing could only alleviate one damage at a time, drinking the poison there would allow her poison to spread through his body and kill him. "And if I died poisoned, alone in your company, who do you think would be held responsible?" the prince asked. The queen then showed contempt. She laughed heartily in Callion's face, and asked if Callion thought he could threaten her with that, and that he should not imagine he was the first enemy she had faced in such a way. She continued, saying that the world knew she had killed Callion's mother, but chose silence. What made him think it would be different this time? Hearing these words made the prince angry. Callion then asked the queen what he should do with it. The queen, with a smile on her face, told him to feel free and do what he had to do. The prince then agreed and drank the tea. He drank it all in one gulp, and the queen merely watched. With a wicked smile on her face, she called him a fool and asked who would dare blame her.
"Not even Romain himself would be able to subjugate me to his will," the queen said, smiling. "There was nothing in Caris I couldn't have, including the queen's throne," she thought. "And over time, I removed what was in my way and soon got everything I wanted. But
I was only missing one thing. There was still something that was mine," the queen thought as she looked at the king. The moment the start of the banquet was announced, someone began to cough. The queen watched the scene with disguised amusement, thinking that now, finally, only he remained. Suddenly, Prince Callion collapsed to the floor, expelling strawberry juice. Everyone present at the banquet was alarmed by the scene, rising to offer aid. They clamored for a priest to be called. From behind her fan, the queen displayed malicious amusement. Callion lay fallen, right at the queen's feet. Despair gripped everyone, and many questions hung in the air. Was the drink poisoned? Had he been poisoned before the banquet? Who had he been with before arriving? At that moment, a man demanded silence from everyone, warning that otherwise, they would face death. The queen felt victorious, for no one dared to openly accuse her. The king ran towards Callion. Holding the prince in his arms, he pleaded for him to hold on. Callion then called him father, which surprised the king. The king recalled the day Callion's mother had passed away. She had asked him to protect their son. Callion tried to say something, but his voice failed and he merely pointed. The king seemed to understand what the prince meant. The queen declared herself shocked by such a disgraceful incident in the palace, stating that she could not remain there and would return to Hyzia Palace. With the prince still in his arms, the king, with suppressed anger, questioned how she dared to do that to his son. Then, he shouted Queen Khaleesi's name aloud. Everyone was shocked, for they had never expected to witness such a scene. The queen turned to the king with a gaze that had transformed from happiness to astonishment. Then, several whispers began. Some said that the two had been together earlier. Others wondered if she had poisoned him, and many claimed they would not be surprised if she had done it. The queen gripped her fan tightly. She covered her face with the fan and said that he did not know what he was talking about, asking if the prince did not already have a chronic condition. The king, in great fury, retorted that she had been present when Freya died, and, along with all the knights, affirmed the same. He remembered her saying that Freya had passed away due to an illness. "Celeste, even if it is true, you will be to blame," the king said. The queen questioned who guaranteed that he had always been healthy, for no one there would believe him. With a slight smile on her face, she continued, "Perhaps the princes who gather every day for breakfast know about Callion's health. Perhaps ask him about it," the queen said. The king ordered her to stop. With a mocking tone, she claimed to be merely concerned. "Amidst this confusion, our son is only getting worse." The king drew his sword, consumed by fury, and asked how she dared to say, "our son." Someone murmured that of all people, she should not be saying that. The queen's expression changed drastically. Planch continued to assert that Callion was fine, and that he had never noticed anything wrong with him. At least, that was what he had perceived since they last saw each other. At this point, the queen became enraged with Planch. The doors opened, and the arrival of the priest was announced. The queen seized the opportunity to return to Hyzia Palace, while the king asked the priest to heal the prince. Just as the priest prepared to use his magic to heal him, a protective barrier appeared around the prince. Someone appeared right behind the priest and prevented him from using his magic. It was the mage Manisil, who arrived sweating and said, "She wants him to die." The mage then said it would be better to just kill him. The king, furious, asked what he was doing and stated that Callion needed urgent treatment. The mage explained that the prince had a circle in his heart. If a mage's circle came into contact with sacred power, no matter how lucky they were, their heart would explode and the person would die. Callion coughed incessantly, writhing on the ground. The king asked, "If sacred power doesn't work, what will we do? Is it possible with magic?" The mage replied that if it were a healer with the power of nature, perhaps there would be hope, but with magic, it was impossible. The king then ordered him to find a solution quickly, for the prince was suffering. The mage remembered a specific moment in his life. He recalled a scene that had deeply frightened him. A man was kneeling, bleeding from his mouth, just like Callion now. The man, in agony, questioned the reason for his condition. Back in the present, the mage Manisil held Prince Callion's head. He sat on the floor, resting the prince's head on his lap. Callion, with blurred vision, looked at his master's face and asked, "Why are you making that face?" Manisil thought to himself that he had never imagined he would use that spell again in his life. In his mind, he saw himself using the same magic on that man from the past, telling him that the magic would remove his pain, and calling him stubborn. Days passed. In the streets, people moved about normally. As a couple walked, a leaf flew towards them. The leaf hit the man's face, startling him. When he looked up, he saw countless other leaves floating. All of them carried written pleas for the truth about the Brizzen family responsible for the deaths of 37 people to be revealed. The Brizzen family found itself at the center of a scandal. Suspicions that the queen had tried to poison Callian, along with the cruel acts of the Brizzen family, came to light, causing great outrage. No one dared to associate with the Brizzens, as any misstep could drag them to the same fate. The king himself pointed to Queen Celeste as guilty of the poisoning. "To think the queen is a murderer!" the people exclaimed. The enraged populace defaced the kingdom's walls, demanding Queen Khaleesi's elimination. The mage Manisil recalled that Prince Callian had said that for the establishment of a mage troop, they needed to take advantage of the moment Khaleesi was in disgrace. As the king read what appeared to be a letter from the prince, he seemed very thoughtful. The king was surprised, as Callian had had the same idea as him, to create a mage troop. Standing before Callian's bed, Queen Khaleesi said that the Mage Association must be quite busy. With her face partially hidden by a fan, she asked when they had prepared something like this. Callian feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea what she was talking about. The prince added that he had been able to rest for a long time thanks to her, which annoyed her, because for someone who had been between life and death, he looked remarkably well. He continued, saying he had almost gone to the afterlife. Gasping and sweating heavily, Callian said that due to his condition, it would be difficult for them to have a long conversation. "If you have nothing more to say, I will rest," the prince concluded. The queen, on edge, asked what he thought about negotiating one by one. Callian replied that she should have said that a week ago, as the situations had changed. However, he said he would listen to what she had to say. The queen then proposed that if he claimed the accusations were untrue, she would not object to what he had prepared. The prince laughed heartily at her words and stated that she was misinterpreting the situation. As the queen hid her angry expression behind her fan, the young prince said he did not need her permission and asked if she had nothing else to do there. The queen gripped her fan in fury. She then stood up, pointing a finger at Callian, and demanded that he state his desires. With a smile on his face, Callian said, "In the land where Suspanian's descendants rule, how can the sound of swords be so loud?" He concluded by stating that he wanted to disband Pable's night troops. This left the queen utterly astonished, and she asked if he wanted to disband all of them. Pable, the royal knights given to Kelete by Marquis Bryson. Losing them would mean Selice would lose half of her power. Callian told her to dissolve Pable and initiate the founding of a mage troop, adding that there were no other terms. The queen was enraged by his actions. The prince then called his servant. The servant brought some papers and handed them to the queen. Ian said, "Here is the testimony containing the oath seal," as he handed the paper to the astonished queen. She was surprised because of the oath seal. The prince explained that it was a magic that engraved the contract's content onto both their hearts, and if the oath were broken, the heart would be destroyed, followed by death. This was how Queen Celeste came to visit Callian right after he had woken up. Meanwhile, the first prince was tending to the roses in his garden. He noticed a fallen rose on the ground and fell into deep thought. His mind took him back to the moment Callian collapsed. Their eyes had met moments before the collapse. He also recalled the conversation with his brother at the cafe when Callian mentioned that the roses would soon bloom. It was then that he realized Callian's desire to be involved in that process. Curious to observe these roses bloom, he considered acting according to Callian's wishes. The moment Prince Callian collapsed, Randall was about to speak up. However, Planch did so first, stating that Callian had been fine moments before. Randall was surprised, as it was Planch who had come to the prince's aid. Randall realized that something was, indeed, changing. Back in Callian's room, he was explaining the oath's function to the queen. It was a magic that engraved the contract's content onto both their hearts, and if the oath were violated, the heart would be destroyed, leading to immediate death. "Given that the trust in our relationship is not very strong," the prince said. Callian asked what the queen intended to do. She remained silent, as if in shock. The queen took the quill from Callian's servant's hand and began to sign the oath. As she signed, magic began to emanate. The magic enveloped her arm as she completed the signature. Thus, the contract was sealed, binding both their hearts in a magical chain. Angrily, the queen threw the quill to the floor, breaking it. As she turned to leave, Callian asked her not to misunderstand the situation. He continued, explaining that he had never had a good relationship with his brothers, and that, On that fateful day when he was poisoned, Planch did not intervene on his behalf. If she had uttered one more word at that moment, the king's sword would have immediately severed her head. In Seleka's mind, only Planch's image formed. She seemed surprised by Callion's words. Regaining her strong and determined demeanor, she quickly left Prince Callion's room. Callion merely watched her leave. Sometime later, the mage went to the prince's room and expressed his shock upon learning of Selesi's visit. Someone, apparently, was devouring many bananas. The mage felt more at ease, realizing that Callion was simply very hungry. Callion, while devouring a banana, stated that they were delicious. The mage commented that, having barely survived, anything he ate would be delicious. The prince, smiling, replied that he had done his part. Manasil was indignant at Callion's ability to smile, for literally he could have been visiting the prince's grave at that moment. He added that, if it weren't for the elven siblings who appeared at that exact instant, and the luck that the girl named Hina was a healer who dealt with the power of nature. As the mage emphasized that Callion could have died, the prince expressed surprise, as he didn't know Hina was a healer. Manasil asked if he hadn't known that in his past life. The young man replied that, at that time, he only had ties with Kyrie. When he met Kyrie, Hina had already left. The mage then got his answers without needing to ask anything further. He was furious with Callion for having taken the poison without any plan to survive that situation, relying solely on the power of the blessing. As Callion apologized, the mage threw him a paper. They were the identification certificates for the children Callion had requested earlier, and the prince didn't even remember them anymore. Suddenly, something caught the prince's attention and surprised him. The names of the two siblings had Baron as their surname. The mage explained that they needed a surname, and so he used his own old name, as it didn't seem Callion had brought them by mere coincidence. As he observed the certificate, attentive to every detail, Callion smiled and thanked the mage. He stated that the documents were not fake, but legitimate identifications, and that the mage had guaranteed from the beginning that the children were from Baron's territory. The mage then revealed that Romain had been responsible for it, which surprised the prince. Manasil asked how Callion would feel after rumors of him being the king's most beloved son spread. Callion questioned if such rumors truly existed, and the mage replied that, after the king's actions in front of all the nobles, it was inevitable they would arise. The prince felt confused by his own feelings, thinking that it was something someone else should have felt. He remained seated on the sofa, deeply thoughtful about the entire situation. Callion called Ian to remove the banana peels from the table. His servant Ian approached and stood before him, observing him. He said he had something to tell the prince, who asked what it was. Ian declared that he wished to stop being his assistant. Such a statement left the prince very astonished, as he had not expected anything of the sort. A small child's foot touched the carpet. The boy ran through a magnificent palace hall, flanked by thick columns. At the back, to the left, on the second floor, he headed towards his destination. He peered from behind the wooden counter and loudly shouted that he was there. In front of him, a gravely ill man lay on the bed. His hand was wrapped in bandages. The boy, with a smile on his face, greeted his brother, and in a low voice his brother greeted him back. "Did you hear the crickets calling this morning?" the boy asked his brother. "Crickets, yes. When summer begins, those horrible black insects start screaming like mad," the man replied somberly. The boy, more optimistically, said that crickets had very strange wings, but perhaps they made loud sounds from within themselves, using their stomachs. He suggested catching one of those insects the next morning and bringing it there. The brother, who was bandaged from head to toe, said that he shouldn't do that he didn't like crickets, and asked him to just play his violin. "I heard your son is quite good at medicine," the sick brother said. "He said he was busy with something else." "How can I ask for that?" Disturbing words reached the boy. "But sir, this really hurts me too." "But there must be another way," a man said. "I didn't know at the time how horrible the phrase, 'someone who cannot have something and cannot have that,' would be." "Siloyan," the brother called the boy. "Don't avert your gaze. Look me straight in the eyes." "Understand that I am dying," his brother said, staring at him. Loud screams echoed. "We must flee. Take Siloyan and get him out of here. The fire is spreading fast." That was how my brother, the day before his 15th birthday, decided to end his suffering and that of everyone else. After that day, summer passed. Autumn came and was replaced by winter. Then, the crickets began to call again in the garden, and he withdrew more and more. His father, who couldn't bear to see him suffer, took him out of his room. He always tried to nestle into his father's arms, with his head resting on his shoulder. "What kind of boy is this?" a voice suddenly asked. "This is the third prince of our kingdom," another voice replied. With his head bowed in his hands, grieving, the red-eyed young man looked incredibly sad. Soroyan realized how heavy the prince's heart was. "I would like to resign from my position as your servant," Ian said timidly, looking at Callion. The prince looked at him in shock. "No, what are you talking about?" Callion asked. Ian, sobbing loudly, began to tell her story. She, the person closest to the prince, confessed that she did not understand what was happening. Furthermore, she revealed that she was the one who brought the poison every morning. The prince watched his servant, Ian, who seemed surprised. "It was my fault," Ian confessed. "I ignored the signs and couldn't be by your side when you were in danger. I knew nothing, and once again you almost died," Ian added. Ian then saw the face of her dead brother. "Do not avoid the fact that I am dying," the figure said, as if from beyond, extending its hands toward Ian. "Ian, look at me!" Prince Callian shouted quickly. The servant, Ian, opened her eyes, which were filled with tears as if waking from a trance. The prince then asked who was before him at that moment. From the look in his eyes, it was evident that he expected an answer. Crying, Ian replied, "It's Prince Callian." Callian then placed his hand on Ian's chest and declared that he would not die. "Since I first opened my eyes here, you have been by my side, and it was only thanks to you that I endured until this moment. I survived because you took care of me. It seems I don't know much about you either, but I am certain of one thing. You will continue to protect me from now on, won't you?" the prince asked Ian. The prince's words made Ian cry even more, deeply moved. Ian fell to his knees, weeping. "Stop this now and get up," the prince shouted. Ian thought he could no longer turn back. The prince extended his hand to help him up. "There is one person here I must protect for the rest of my life," Ian thought. Ian said he would get rid of the people who made the prince suffer. Callian asked what Ian was talking about and if he intended to avenge him. Ian replied that he did because it had hurt the prince. Callian then asked him to stop, saying that the elephants should remain still, or a war would begin. Ian told him to forget about the war, even if he wasn't acting under the Ziefreed family's identity. The prince called him an elephant. Shocked, Ian asked if he knew. Callian shrugged and smiled. Ian asked since when he knew, and Callian replied vaguely. Ian said that wasn't something the prince should know and confessed that he hated his father. Callian, in turn, said that as soon as he got rid of the nuisances, he wanted a coffee. Then Callian asked Ian if they wanted to bet on who would grow more. In a dream, Baron saw Callian. They were facing each other. Callian displayed a calm smile, while Baron looked astonished. Callian then approached Baron. He came very close to him, still smiling, and quickly passed by Baron. Baron watched Callian go towards two other people. They seemed to be longtime friends. Callian then looked at Baron, who was very frightened by all of it. Baron reached out his hand to Callian. Callian's smile faded, and he looked surprised. He then smiled again, now with a confident gaze. Callian said something that woke Baron. Then, with a smile on his face, Callian watched Baron as if he were falling. Baron then plummeted, and Callian merely watched him. Baron awoke from the dream, still in Callian's body. He sat up in bed, not quite understanding what had happened in the dream. While conducting a funeral for the previous Callian, Manisil asked if he had truly departed in the end. Callian replied that he thought the original Callian might have wanted to enjoy what he so desired before leaving, but he was in such a hurry that he ended up leaving. Prince Callian stated that he would dedicate this life to the original Callian and ensure that he fulfilled his desires. He commented that if that life represented shackles for the original Callian, he felt a touch of envy for his complete freedom. Addressing Manisil, Prince Callian declared that he would not feign ignorance. There were many things the original Callian had started, and favors that had been requested of him. He would live his second life worthily. Pabl's Knight Corps was quickly disbanded, and its members returned to Marquis Brisson. Romain advised them not to believe unfounded rumors about the royal family. Meanwhile, King Elon announced the creation of a Mage Corps. 3 months later, Ian and a maid commented on the need to call the tailor. Ian instructed the maid to inform the tailor that many of his clothes needed repairs, and his current ones were already too small for him. Prince Callian entered the room where Romain and King Elon awaited him. Romain observed that Callian seemed to have grown even taller since their last meeting, commenting that the prince appeared taller even than Planch. King Elon asked if Callian had finalized the preparations for Rosalita. The prince replied that everything was complete, as his birthday was approaching. Manisil explained that there was someone he needed to introduce to Callian, and that was the reason for his summons. This would be the mage who would act as his guardian during Rosalita. The man entered the room, introducing himself and declaring it an honor to meet him. It was Arsene Hertz. Callian observed him with horror, he thought. Romain added that Hertz was a talented figure who would join the Mage Corps, expressing hope that Callian and Hertz would learn from each other and grow closer over time. Callian then replied angrily, stating that it was quite unexpected and a very special birthday gift. Callian asked when the Mage Corps would be formed. Elon replied that it would not be so soon, as they did not yet have a name, the number of members, or even a uniform. Nothing was confirmed, and there was still a long way to go. "It is just the beginning," Elon said, while Hertz smiled at the prince. Elon asked Romain if he would like to name the Mage Corps. Romain seemed to have something in mind, as he had been thinking about it for some time. With a smile, Romain suggested the name Valkan. Prince Callian also seemed to approve of the name. Elon commented that it was almost as if Romain had been waiting to be asked, and it would have been a problem if he hadn't. Callian asked Hertz what he thought. Holding his teacup, the prince awaited Hertz's reply, who, smiling, asked what he meant. Callian clarified that it was about the name Valkan, and if he liked it or if it was familiar to him. Elon then cast a glance at Callian and Hertz. With a smile on his face, Hertz affirmed that it was a good name. Elon raised a barrier and was shocked to hear about the past relationship between Callian and Hertz, asking if he should cancel his recommendation. Callian replied that there was no need. Elon commented that if it was as Callian said, and the prince confirmed that Hertz was the one who killed the original Callian, he knew Hertz was different from his past self, just as the current situation was different. However, he still felt it was wrong to let things pass without further questioning. Meanwhile, Hertz trembled somewhere. Callian addressed Polun, who greeted him. Callian said it had been a long time, and asked Polun to make himself comfortable. Prince Callian apologized for hiding his name, and for appearing without prior notice. Polun expressed that he was extremely honored that Callian had sought him out. Polun observed that Callian had never allied himself with nobles until then. The fact that he had visited him in secret showed consideration for the speculations that might arise. Callian declared that he would not beat around the bush, and would get straight to the point. He was there to collect his reward for saving Polun's life. He asked what Polun's emporium would like to negotiate. Polun replied that he had indeed expanded his business, recently starting official diamond trading, and even exchanging horses with the imperial family. However, that was not the answer Callian was looking for. Polun admitted that he still did not possess something specific to offer in return. Callian merely smiled, gazing at the Baron. Next, he asked if Polun would be capable of operating something beyond the emporium. The Baron replied that with adequate staff and funds there would be no problem. Callian stated that he possessed the necessary staff and money, but warned that Brizen would also have them. Polun then expressed that he thought only Callian held such resources. A brief silence hung between the two of them. Callian began to laugh, agreeing that Polun was right and that Brizen also had resources. Polun, in turn, observed that if they had the same level of money as Callian, Brizen would not pose a problem. Callian revealed that they were planning to form a troop of mages. They had enough money and people, but the challenge lay in administration. Polun then asked if that was the reward for Callian's life. Callian merely smiled at him and said that he had already received it, confirming that it was the price of his life. This left Polun slightly apprehensive, but he assured him that he would comply promptly. The prince then reflected that his plan had worked. He should have died after his 15th birthday, but he had altered his destiny before that. Now, he had trustworthy people by his side. What was missing was finding Sisfanian's will in his Rosalita, and Callian wondered why all of this was happening. Upon arriving at his birthday party's ball, Callian admired the celebration prepared for him, noting how perfect everything was. Planch was leaning against one of the hall's pillars. The prince walked up to him to talk. With a smile, he approached Planch and greeted him, saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. However, Planch completely ignored him, and the prince simply moved on. Planch called him Bloody Eyes. Callian looked back, seeing the second prince with his usual nonchalant air. The third prince, Callian, declared that he would no longer permit such treatment, and that his name was Callian. With a smile on his face, Planch asked, "Callian?" Then, Planch stated that he was not the Callian he knew. This surprised the young prince. Planch continued, describing that the Callian he saw rode horses, used swords, and even talked back to what others said. Then, quickly approaching Callian, he asked who he truly was. Callian was greatly astonished by the question. He then thought that he could not forget. He was no longer the king of Secretia, having lost his homeland to Planch. And that was not the Mad King. It was Planch who brought ruin to Secretia. He decided then that it was better to wait until he obtained Sisfanian's will. With a smile on his face, he told Planch that he was speaking strangely, and continued smiling at the second prince, who merely looked at him with anger. Sometime later, the mage, conversing with Prince Callian, commented that it made sense for Planch to notice the change, because even though he was a scoundrel, he was not an idiot. The young prince looked at the mage with an expression of misunderstanding. He asked, "Is Planch a scoundrel?" The mage replied that he was, and that it was no surprise. Then the prince gave a slight smile and said that was how he saw him. Callian added that he pretended not to understand, but Planch obviously did not believe him. He then asked what they would do to make him believe, as the prince himself had stated that he was no one but Callian. Callian agreed that the mage was right. He added that he had indeed said that, while the mage observed him thoughtfully. The mage thought that, despite Callian Callian having stated that he would not live like Barum, that promise would not be so easy to forget. Then, the mage caught the young prince's attention and handed him a ring. The mage said that if Callian ever needed an old man to talk to, he would listen. Callian asked if the ring possessed any communication magic. The mage confirmed, explaining that he had infused some of his power into the ring. He warned that it could not be used in places with Cisphanian power, such as the castle, but that it would always respond when possible. The prince thanked him, expressing that he liked feeling connected to his master. Manisil asked what worried him, stating that everyone there was a good person. With a smile on his face, his apprentice asked if the mage truly believed that. Sometime later, a man introduced himself as Commander Yoren, leader of the Ziefreed Knights. He continued, assuring that his knights would protect the prince until they reached the Cisphanian nest, located in Ziefreed territory. With irony, the prince thought that was to be expected from the Ziefreed Knights. He did not imagine the protection would be so impressive. Ian, his servant, was the eldest son and young master of the Siegfried family. Ian asked if his highness needed anything before they departed. The prince, placing his hand on Ian's shoulder, said, "I need something to drink." While Ian asked if water would suffice, the knight seemed enraged. The servant then suggested a cup of tea in case the prince did not want water, and the prince agreed. Ian went to fetch it, and his highness thanked him. The prince turned his gaze to the knights. He merely smiled as he watched them. The knights seemed enraged by the fact that the prince was giving orders to Ian. Meanwhile, Manisil, Kyrie, and Hina were astonished by the prince's attitude. The mage wondered why the prince was gratuitously increasing the number of his enemies. That was a unique opportunity to witness the will of Sigmund Khan Cisphanian. The entire kingdom was celebrating Callian's birthday. Everyone watched the coming-of-age ceremony of the Prince of Kairis. Even Planch was present, watching, though she did not seem to be enjoying it much. The queen, on the other hand, was not present. She was having tea in her chambers. The prince then paraded on his horse among the public. His gaze met Manisil's, and the two exchanged smiles. The prince passed through a giant door, and there the Rosalita had begun. "He has been in an accident before, so I am worried. Wouldn't it be better for you to accompany him?" the king asked. Calmly, the mage replied that there was nothing to worry about, as he was more concerned about the prince inside the castle than outside it, as he placed his cup on the table. The king said the mage was the same as always, and that was not a compliment. He asked if the mage truly was not worried. With a sigh, the mage thought that for someone with as many worries as the king, the situation had been surprisingly different until that moment. Then, the mage answered the king's question, stating that it was not as if he was saying anything wrong. The king then exclaimed that it was precisely about that aspect he was speaking. While riding through the forest, the prince became curious about how the ring worked. He tried to ask some questions, but no answer came from the ring. Ian said he had heard that Tencel deliveries had arrived and that the palace seemed chaotic. He suggested they talk so they wouldn't get bored. The prince said that Ian was responsible for the situation he had been seeing in recent days and was surprised when his servant told him he was working hard to speak with him. Ian then turned to the knights and asked them to listen. He explained that Prince Callian had been declared by the mage as having no magical talent and that in terms of swordsmanship, he knew little about self-defense. "This means he is as fragile and precious as a flower," Ian said. "Therefore you must protect him very well." The knights were very disappointed. As the young master and eldest son of the Siegfried family, Ian informed them that the arrival in Latlan would still take about 2 to 3 hours. As Ian asked if they should take a break, Prince Callian heard a noise coming from the forest and interrupted him. Immediately, all the knights drew their swords, going on high alert at the sound. Kyrie and the mage positioned themselves ready to protect the prince. Observing the source of the noise, Prince Callian pondered that perhaps there was no need for such caution. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the foliage. It was running desperately, crying for help. It was just a small elf, visibly terrified. Callian asked the elf's name, and it replied that it was hungry. Everyone was surprised by the humility with which the prince treated the creature. The prince asked if the elf had come there looking for food, and what it was doing in the forest. The small being replied that it was hiding. The elf seemed overwhelmed by fear. Callian realized there was something unusual about the conversation. One of the knights asked what the next step would be, and Callian stated that they should offer food to the elf. At that instant, the prince heard another noise, this time coming from among the trees. He turned towards the sound and reprimanded the elf, saying it should have warned them if someone was following it. Then, a man appeared among the trees, mounted on his horse. Prince Callian took off his cloak and carefully wrapped it around the small elf. He instructed Kyrie to hide her. One of the knights stepped forward and asked the newcomer's identity. The man replied that he was chasing a thief and asked if they had seen an unusual-looking child. The knight, however, denied having seen such a child and ordered the man to leave. The man then noticed that Kyrie was hiding something and declared that he was not there to fight with knights. He stated that he had only come to find someone and asked for permission to search. At that moment, many lights appeared in the forest. The knight was preparing to respond, but the prince interrupted him, asking what kind of person he was looking for. The man described the person as a young elf. At that instant, Kalyan gave permission for the man to check the area. The small elf became extremely frightened by the prince's permission. The man began to move towards Kyrie, who was protecting the elf. As he passed Prince Kalyan, Kalyan told the man not to turn around and just listen. The prince explained that those accompanying him would not protect him. Their true target was the man himself and the child. As soon as you verify the child's identity, arrows will come from this direction. Before the prince could finish speaking, the man turned around. As he did so, the man saw the glow in the forest intensify. Numerous arrows were shot in his direction. However, all the arrows were broken before they reached their target. Prince Kalyan had saved the man, using his sword to break the arrows and knocking him to the ground to get him out of the archer's line of sight. Kalyan then reminded the man that he had told him not to turn around. More arrows were shot from the forest, and one of the knights shouted, "Ambush! Protect the prince!" At that moment, the mage Hertz cast a spell. It materialized a shield that reflected the arrows. While he was focused on his magic, the mage Hertz saw the enemies retreating. The knight leader ordered them to follow, but not to stray too far. Prince Kalyan then thought that with no more arrows coming their way, the enemies had surely chosen to flee. The man realized that the prince had lowered his guard. Meanwhile, Hertz took the elf who was with Kyrie, so that he could go protect the prince. Approaching the prince, he asked if he was all right. Hertz then shouted, drawing the prince's attention, and the man quickly began to attack. Kyrie shouted for the prince to protect his back. After delivering the attack, the man was surprised, for the young prince, using his small dagger, managed to block the blow. Immediately after defending himself, the prince cast a spell that struck the assailant's chest, causing him intense pain. The man fell to the ground, screaming desperately. The other knights were shocked by the prince's actions. They wondered if the prince was capable of using magic. Then, Ian ran desperately to the prince. He asked if the prince was all right and, relieved, commented that they were lucky things always ended well. Next, he questioned why the prince had advanced, since they had knights to protect him, while Ian, in his mind, thought that the prince only mastered a bit of defensive swordsmanship and was not good at magic. The knights, on the other hand, could only recall the scenes they had just witnessed. They concluded that Ian's words definitely did not match what the young master had demonstrated. The knights wondered what kind of flower, as Ian used to call the prince, was capable of such a feat against an adversary. A few minutes later, the young elf still seemed frightened. The prince approached her, removed her hood, and said they would talk. He stared at her with a somewhat serious expression. Before he could even ask what she had stolen, the elf replied, "Luca did it." "I don't know anything." The elf continued to answer questions before the prince even asked them, stating that she did not know who had stolen it and that the scoundrels had accused her. The prince then brought his hand to his head, looking exhausted by the situation. He called the mage, who promptly made himself available. He asked the mage to organize the information the elf was providing, as she seemed to be answering before she was even questioned. The mage assured him that he would take care of it. The young elf seemed very happy, while the mage, visibly startled, presented his report. As the mage explained that she worked in the Hiriska forest and that her name was Sialus Tian Ureha, the elf interrupted him to say that her name meant spirit of suppressed words. The mage continued, explaining that Luca, the elf with whom she was traveling, seemed to have stolen the item from the men who attacked them. She separated from Luca while she was being pursued by the assailants. It was then that she encountered the prince, and that she did not know why she answered before she was even asked. As the prince tried to say something, the elf interrupted him, stating, "That's not quite right." The prince then gave up trying to speak and indicated that the mage could continue. The mage stepped away, and the elf followed him, starting a conversation about whether she was following him. Meanwhile, Ian asked the prince what his plans were. The prince replied that she would be pursued as soon as they parted ways, so they should leave her near the forest. His servant Ian asked if he would resolve the situation. The prince said he would not, as they had a long journey ahead and there was no reason to get involved. He stated that he would leave the investigation to the nearest lord. As Ian commented that they would arrive around dinner time, the leader of the knights asked if his highness had a minute. The knight explained that there was something suspicious among the assailants' belongings and asked if he could check. The prince asked what it was, and the knight handed him something wrapped in a cloth. Upon opening the cloth, the prince was surprised by the contents. Somewhat startled, the prince asked if the assailant possessed that. The knight replied that he did, and questioned if the prince knew what it was. The prince affirmed that he knew, that it was impossible not to know. It was the poison he himself had once taken, and he said that he needed to see the assailant personally. As they conversed, one of the men commented that he thought the prince was merely a precious young master from a wealthy family. "But I guess that's not all," the assailant concluded. Approaching the assailant, the prince said that he was right. and that he was an even more precious son of a wealthy family. Holding the poison in his hands, the prince said he would be brief and direct, and asked the assailant if he knew what that was. The assailant merely looked, not understanding what the prince was talking about. The assailant replied that all of them had one, and that he thought it was something good, so he stole a few. The prince asked what they were looking for. The assailant said he was not sure. The prince asked who they were, and the assailant replied that he could not see because of the masks. Callion asked if he remembered anything else, but the man denied it. The prince then noticed something strange in the man's behavior. Callion leaned in and said that the man did not seem to be protecting the invaders out of loyalty. He asked what the real problem was and promised to resolve the situation if the man cooperated. The prince asked the man to trust him. After all, he, the precious son of an influential family, could resolve that. The man was astonished by the young prince's attitude. Then whispering, he revealed that his wife was in Hansen village and that the prince knew about it. The prince guaranteed that his wife would be safe and asked what the invaders had lost. The man described the object as a transparent marble, the size of a fingernail. He confessed not knowing what it was exactly, but he heard that a priest of Tensel would need to check it to be sure. The young prince then realized that this meant the invaders were after a sacred relic. Sacred relics were used by the priests of Tensel to replace sacred power. That was why Tensel was trying to obtain as many sacred relics as possible. The prince finally understood the reason for all the fuss. However, he wondered how the invaders had obtained that poison. That was the poison that Secretia's agents carried and took in the worst-case scenario when they failed a mission. The man had obtained it through the White Eagle. The man said he did not know the identities of the invaders, but he heard the title by which they called the leader. The prince asked what it was. Blue Wagtail, the man replied. The prince was startled by the name he heard. He seemed to recognize that name. It was the name of one of Baron's father's birds. He wondered what that individual was doing there. Later that day, already in Latlan territory, the rain fell incessantly. Inside, conversing with the prince, the man commented that perhaps the rain was a good thing, as it had prevented them from advancing since dinner time. Setting his goblet on the table, he said he had been waiting for this day. Very pleased, the man said it was a great honor for him. That was Count Hale Latlan, Lord of Latlan territory. Count Hale, still very pleased, continued, "Let me see. At times like these, it's almost as if the heavens are telling you to serve the prince." While the young prince thought the count talked too much, he remembered the conversation he had with Ian earlier. Ian had asked if he did not remember Count Hale. The count was one of those who had sent him a gift before, and the prince remembered that Hale's name was on the list of recipients, those who had received the gifts back. His servant had said that although Hale was originally on Prince Randall's side, he had quickly switched allegiance to Prince Planch 6 years ago, during the Great Desert and Tensel War. The prince then thought that this was the opportunist to whom he had sent the gift. Count Hale, still very pleased, continued saying that he had been waiting for the day the prince would arrive. The prince thought that Hale must have spoken with Planch the previous year. Malcolm Chadish, Count Hale's butler, seemed quite embarrassed by the count's behavior. Hertz entered through the door, asking for permission, and said he had something to tell the prince. He then whispered to the young prince that they had captured the messenger pigeon. The prince knew that they had tried to warn Blue Wagtail that they were there. No other bird would fly in that rain and darkness with such a purpose. Hale asked the mage where he was on a cold day like that and if he would like to drink. The prince intervened, saying that they did not want to drink. He wanted to know if there was a Tensel priest nearby. Count Hale knocked over the wine bottle on the table, smiled, apologized, and said he seemed a little drunk. He asked what he had said, and if it was about the Tensel priest. The count became enraged and asked if the prince was talking about those damned wretches who had no way of coming to such a remote place. The prince called the count's attention, telling him to calm down, but the count continued, saying that those wretches were evil and that if the prince looked closely. Before the count finished his sentence, the young prince snapped his fingers and ordered him to sleep. The count then fell onto the table, asleep. Those present in the room were startled by what the prince did. He said he could not contain his anger at the count's rude behavior. Next, the prince appeared riding his horse. Conversing with Manasil through his ring, the mage asked if the prince was saying that he had become involved with a secret item and that his life was now in danger. The prince continued, assuring Manasil that he should not worry too much about his retirement. Manasil asked about the extent of the prince's connections. The prince replied that he was someone who had never failed a mission. The prince added that it was impossible for them not to have realized he was the Prince of Karis. He wondered what kind of situation would lead someone to risk using an arrow as an agent's instrument. Manasil instructed the prince to look for a place near Latlan where the Tensel priest was staying. The mage added, saying that he believed it was necessary to investigate what the secret agent was plotting with the priests. In a random bar, a woman was cleaning glasses and cups. Then, Prince Callion entered the establishment. He greeted the woman, explaining that the individuals outside had merely followed him. The woman, setting down the glass, told him not to worry and that she wasn't cruel enough to harm those not involved. The prince commented that he thought she had attacked them, even knowing who he was. She replied that that was precisely why she had instructed him not to interfere. The prince then noticed that everyone around them was unconscious. The woman observed that he had been rash. The prince walked to the counter where the woman was and asked if he was involved now. The woman replied that she would say yes, but she looked at the prince and noticed the red aura around him. The woman then concluded that this would not be easy. The prince smiled slightly as he looked at the woman. She asked if the elf she had been pursuing had died. The woman explained that they had lost him when he took the forest path. "If I had known it would be such a headache, I wouldn't have pursued him in the first place," the woman said. "I particularly dislike this situation, but since it hasn't harmed us much, could you leave?" the woman asked, adding that in that case, she would leave the elf child alone. The prince, picking up a glass, said that if she answered a few questions, he would leave. He asked why she was looking for a sacred relic. Looking at her over the rim of the glass, he stated that she was not a priestess. The woman then made an irritated expression. She snatched the glass from Callion's hand and said that lately, relics were expensive. The prince then inferred that she was selling them. The woman explained that her main job usually did not pay well. The prince merely observed the woman and asked if the buyer of the sacred relics was in Latlan. He argued that there was no reason for her to sell the relics inland, as it would be easier to find priests in Karis. The woman replied that there was no one who paid more than that buyer, and that he was also someone with whom she had a connection. The prince thought that if there was a connection, it could only be with secret agents, someone who sold information about Karis. And now, to pay for information for the Blue Ladybug, these agents were buying sacred relics. The prince then noticed that she had served him wine. He looked at the wine, thinking he would ask his last question. A little distance away, in the royal palace, the king asked what the mage had come to ask him, and commented that he was now being treated as an informant. Manasil replied that he went there knowing the king would be awake, and that there was no reason to go to such trouble to confirm something the king already knew. He asked how many Tencel priests were in Karis and where. The king then said that he did not know if Manasil already knew something and was asking because of it, or if it was just a coincidence. Tensel's representatives came specifically because of this situation. Among the 14 priests, besides the one who was in the palace, they wanted to find and take the rest, so that they would not request more priests. The king expressed discomfort, saying that after sending them to celebrate what they had desired for so long, they acted as if Karis was using their priests. Manasil then stated that Tensel's situation was not good. Manasil asked, they did not reveal their situation, but they needed the priests. And what did the king do? The king replied that they were to find the rest and take them. The king questioned the reason for the question, and the mage explained that Prince Callion wanted to know the location of the priests. The king found the prince's question strange and questioned the reason for such an inquiry. He wondered why Callion would ask about the priest's location, since he himself had arrived at the place where they were. Back at the bar, Callion asked the woman if the relic buyer was Count Hale Latlan. The woman, while drinking her wine, replied, "Who knows?" She concluded, "I don't think that question is simple." The prince then returned to his horse, and riding quickly, stated that the man had feigned ignorance. He hid the priest and acted as if he knew nothing. Furthermore, after buying relics at a high price, he sold information to Secretia's agents. Manasil agreed, confirming that the prince was right. Callion then said that he needed to return to the castle immediately. The mage noticed his urgency and asked if there was a problem. Callion confirmed, explaining that when he used magic to put the man to sleep during dinner, he believed that Count Latlan was not truly drunk. Meanwhile, at Latlan Palace, someone was shouting that it was disrespectful, asking how many times he would have to repeat himself. It was Ian, speaking with the butler, stating that the prince had gone out for a walk. The butler insisted that he needed a quick word with the prince, as the count wished to apologize for his behavior. Ian interrupted him, asking if he was trying to cover up his insolence. Ian seemed genuinely furious with the situation and reiterated, "Since when can a count's butler interrogate a prince's whereabouts?" The butler became visibly frightened and did not know how to respond. Ian remained thoughtful about all of it, considering that the prince had probably not yet returned. The butler asked again when the prince would return. Ian shouted, saying that he could not inform him and that he should leave. At that moment, the prince appeared at the bedroom door, asking if he couldn't rest. Both Ian and the old butler were startled. Callion then called his servant incompetent. "I told you to give a proper excuse and send them away. How difficult can that be?" he asked, surprising Ian. His servant apologized, explaining that the butler had been very persistent and asked to handle the situation. The prince then closed the door quite forcefully. Outside the room, the butler continued to apologize, saying that he did not know His Highness was resting and that he would withdraw. The prince leaned against the door, relieved. He had a slight start, realizing that he had spoken like a certain person, which left a bitter taste in his mouth. His servant entered through the door and said that the prince had returned earlier than expected, and through the window no less, the servant added. The prince replied that it was a long story. Callian asked if anyone else had looked for him, or if anything suspicious had occurred. Ian replied that it was just the butler from earlier. Although there is a prince who uses windows as an exit, Ian concluded, remembering when His Highness left through the window, even though it was on the 3rd floor. Callian gave a slight laugh and said that he understood. The young prince asked why Ian was so angry, noting that he had not been so irritated in the palace. Ian replied that it was because the butler did not listen to him. Even after he said that the prince was out walking, the butler kept asking when he would return. Callian found the reason strange. His servant explained that the butler kept asking, and that in fact he seemed more interested in when the prince would return than where he had gone. A little later, the prince was talking with the mage and said that the count already suspected they were investigating something. He added that they were right to state that the count was not drunk. The mage asked why Callian believed the count pretended to be drunk and acted that way. The prince replied that the date for exchanging sacred relics with the blue maracita was today, which explained the maracita's presence. The wine was just an excuse for the count to escape unnoticed, but the plan went wrong when Callian put him to sleep. And when he learned that I had left the castle, he sent his butler to investigate, the prince said. The mage, understanding, asked, why does he desire a sacred relic so much? Callian replied that Hale probably wanted to offer it in exchange for a favor with Tencel, Prince Randall's mother's homeland. The mage added, while maintaining a relationship with Randall, he also flirts with Planch and sends secret gifts to Callian. The prince completed. He sold information from Kairos to a secret agent from Secretia. What a cunning fellow. Helping Salas, who was being pursued, was the beginning, the prince continued. The man who was hunting her informed me of the Blue Maracita's name, and that's how I discovered that Hale was sending relics to Tencel to flatter Randall through the Blue Maracita. If all of this isn't a coincidence, the prince paused. The rain won't stop until tomorrow, and since I'm stuck here, I'll deal with this traitor. In his room, Hale broke a glass in a fit of rage. He thought he should have realized Callian would be a problem when the prince returned the gifts. Hale was certain Callian had used some magic, as only enchantments could induce such a deep sleep. His plans were a mess because of him, acting all arrogant just because Manasil is on his side. And how dare someone with common blood think they are on the same level as princes? Stupid Select. Why didn't she kill him before this mess started? Hale wondered. I worked so hard to build a good relationship with the nobles. I spent a fortune on Marquis Brison. They promised me fertile lands on the outskirts of Karis, but because of Callian, things changed, Hale said, enraged. At that moment, the butler entered through the door, asking the count for permission. Hale threw himself onto the sofa and asked if the butler had managed to speak with the Blue Maracita. The butler replied that he had not, perhaps later. Enraged, Count Hale threw a glass at the butler's head, calling him an imbecile. Hale asked if the butler knew how to do anything right, and observed that it was raining, which meant the half-blood would sleep there again. The butler, frightened, asked if he should postpone the transaction. Hale, extremely angry, replied that there was nothing to be done. They could not risk it with the prince and his men present. He shouted for a maid to fetch his clothes. Hale continued, stating that he would teach Prince Callian a lesson in manners. The next day, Callian was sitting at the table, calmly having lunch. Count Hale merely observed the young man, thinking that Callian acted as if nothing was wrong. Here in Karis, the title of Count demands respect, Hale thought. The nobility will not stand idly by if they learn that magic was used against me. Your royal blood will not protect you, foolish little prince. Soon you will be begging me for forgiveness. Hale then apologized to Callian for his behavior the previous night. The prince replied that it was no problem. The count asked if an enchantment had been used. Before Hale could finish his question, Callian replied that he had put him to sleep with an enchantment, as the count was already becoming unbearable. With a smile on his face, Callian told Hale not to worry, as it must have been his first time hosting a member of the royal family. He concluded by saying that the count must have been nervous. Count Hale forced a smile outwardly, but inwardly he was enraged, as Callian acted as if the fault truly lay with the count himself. Callian said he was tired of investigating the person who had attacked him. The count asked if it was the man the prince had brought. The prince replied that it was, and that they had gathered a lot of information. The count thought he should know more about that. Before Hale could ask anything, Callian said it was about the name of a bird, and this made the count spit out all his wine. The butler, startled by the scene, grabbed a cloth for the count. Count Hale told the butler not to touch him, as he was speaking with the prince. Callian concluded by saying he needed to analyze the details more thoroughly, but he thought the count would want to know what had happened on his lands. Count Hale stood up and said he would help him with that, as he would not allow a prince to be attacked on his lands. "Do you think I'll let you mess with my lands? Just wait and see. I will get to the bottom of this and find your weakness," the count thought. One of the knights arrived and asked to speak with his highness. Watching the knight whisper to the prince, the count thought he needed to send him away from his territory. The prince interrupted the count's thoughts, saying that the message was for the count himself, which surprised him. Smiling, Callian said the man wanted to speak with Hale. The prince and the count then headed to a place that resembled a prison. The count was visibly enraged that Callian had brought him to such a place. The prince, for his part, thought that the count certainly harbored such feelings, but everything had already been meticulously prepared for him to fall into the trap. The scene then flashed back to the previous night, in the same location. The man, imprisoned behind bars, asked if anything had happened to his wife. Callian replied that the man's family was fine, assuring him that he had given his word that nothing would happen to them. The man then questioned the prince's presence there, and Callian replied that, most likely, the man himself already knew the reason. By now, the man would be executed. He had attacked a member of the royal family, and as soon as the investigation was concluded, he would be taken to Karis and executed. And even if his life were spared, the prince explained that he would not receive proper treatment. His arm would necrotize, and he would eventually die. The man then asked what the prince was trying to imply. Callian then stated that he could offer him a way out. The man showed surprise, and the prince continued, saying that he could live far from that territory, in a place where he would find peace, but only if you help me. In return, I will ensure that the punishment for your offense is limited to the amputation of your arm. At this, the man's expression turned frightened. The prince, for his part, maintained his serious gaze. The man then agreed with the prince and asked what he should do. Returning to the present moment, the man revealed that he had requested the count's presence because Mariquita was, in fact, a secret agent from Secretia. She was there to sell some goods to a client with whom she had apparently been meeting for a long time. The prince then commented that it was strange, as such a relationship would only last if it involved a double agent, a great, treacherous traitor, selling information. "Don't you agree, Count?" the prince asked, concluding his speech. The count appeared desperate with the entire situation, barely able to utter a word. Callian then remained silent, waiting for the count to make his move, which would provide him with the evidence he needed. Later, at the palace, the butler knelt before the prince, begging for forgiveness. He claimed that everything he had done was merely following his master's orders. Although he was not trying to exonerate himself, he pleaded for the prince's clemency. The butler thought he knew Count Latlan would be discovered, but he did not expect such a turn of events. The prince, in a thoughtful tone, asked the butler, "Are you a priest of Tencel?" This left the butler astonished. Callian continued, stating that the butler must be the one buying and selling the relics. And the reason he was acting so submissively to Count Latlan must be because the count had discovered a secret of his. The butler then revealed that if they discovered he was selling the relics, Tencel would execute him as soon as he returned. Callian was surprised to discover that the butler was selling the relics. So the count was not trying to buy them, he wondered. He then asked the butler to whom he had sold the relics. The butler replied that he had sold them to Queen Celesti's elder brother, Viscount Renan Brisson. "He is presenting the sacred relics to Tencel," the butler said. Renan Brisson established a connection with Tencel. This means he betrayed Planch and sided with Randall. He turned his back on Celesti and the rest of his own Brisson family, who wished for Planch as heir. Speaking with the mage Manasil, the prince commented that the trap he had set for the count had caught something much better. The mage asked what the prince would do next. The prince replied that it was something that would cause a great stir, and asked if they should discuss the matter with Romain at that moment. The mage agreed. Callian asked Manasil to write a letter to Count Hale Latlan before that. The prince instructed his servants to treat the arm of the man imprisoned underground. The wound was severe and would take a long time to heal, so it would be better to amputate it. Next, he instructed them to give that to the man to eat, showing the poison. The knight confirmed, saying he would inform the man. He also instructed Kyrie to go to Hansen village, find the man's wife, and take her to a safe place. As the man took the medicine, the prince was interrupted by the young elf girl who ran into his room, saying she had come with Heine, even without permission. Before the prince could ask, the young elf girl replied, asking him not to scold Heine. The young elf girl then ran towards the little bird, and the prince thought that was not his problem. She approached the little bird and began to play with it. Ian then asked the prince what he planned to do with the pigeon, if he would take it with him. Callian replied that he would not. Ian concluded, "Are you thinking about when you will return it to its owner?" Hina also began to play with the pigeon. Callian and Ian merely watched them. Then the prince told Hina that he would give her a bird when they returned to the palace, as he needed to return that pigeon tonight. Hina tried to argue that Merlin might not like having a bird in their room, but the prince merely smiled and said it was a pity. He asked Hina to help him release the bird as soon as he had dinner, and he asked her not to forget to open the window as well. Hina's tone was doubtful. The prince then revealed that he was expecting a guest. A few hours hours passed, and everyone had already left His Highness's room. Only the prince remained there, reading his book. He heard a noise coming from the window. Closing his book, the prince said that the person had arrived earlier than expected. Then the visitor said he was very moved by the letter's content. The letter stated that if the recipient did not want their actions revealed to Nailangsha, they must come to meet him. It was Marikita Azul who had arrived. She asked why he was threatening her. The prince, pulling a paper from his book, said that he had evidence that Hale was trading relics and selling information. He added, "And once you give me this evidence, I will keep your secret." The woman simply remained silent, looking at him. He asked if that was her answer, and she replied that it was. She said that she hated complicated relationships. Then, she hurled several magical projectiles at him. The prince was astonished to see magical orbs coming his way. As he created a magical barrier to protect himself, he thought that, in the past, the woman used a sword. All the projectiles were repelled and struck the walls, making noise. The knights outside became agitated, as there was an intruder in the prince's room. Callian locked the door and told them not to enter. He asked the woman if she had truly come with the intention of killing him, and asked if there was anything else. The woman advanced on him and said that she had nothing else. She drew her sword and lunged at the prince, who blocked the attack. He knew that the common iron sword he possessed would be no match for her aura, and he needed to end the battle quickly without using aura. The prince then managed to land a blow on the woman, but she quickly retreated with her sword to protect herself, until the prince managed to disarm her. But when he least expected it, she still had one more magical orb to attack him. She hurled the orb at him. It was too fast to block without aura, so he imbued his sword with aura and managed to cut the magical orb in half. But because of this, his sword could not withstand it and broke. The woman, seeing that he had managed to cut the magical orb in half, asked if he was a master swordsman. The two remained silent, and the prince wondered what he should do. The prince then called her by her true name, Ayla. This visibly astonished her. Just as she was about to ask how he knew her name, the prince firmly held her face. As Ayla questioned his actions, the prince opened her mouth. Looking inside, he stated that the poison that should have been there was not present. Callian then demanded that she reveal what she knew. Ayla asked if he would free her if she spoke. "I've heard that Secretions are determined people, but I don't believe that's your case," Callian said. In his thoughts, the prince pondered if she had always been this way, or if she had become like that. Ayla, in turn, insisted that it would be better to let her go. Ayla continued, pointing out that a master swordsman carried a sword inferior to that of the guards, as if to conceal his true abilities. "If you don't want to be discovered, send me away. Otherwise, I will reveal to the knights outside what I have just witnessed," Ayla threatened. In another timeline, Marikita Azul was loyal to Secretia, a master swordsman dedicated to her blade. "That wasn't you," the prince thought. Then holding her by the shirt, the prince declared, "If you go so far as to ask me not to die, then you shouldn't have died in front of me." Ayla was shocked by the prince's words, and a silence settled between the two. He released her clothing and told her not to expect anything in return. "It's not a secret valuable enough to be worth your life." He instructed her to present evidence, and then he would not interrogate her. The prince added that the interrogation would be conducted by the White Eagle, which frightened Ayla. A little further away, a man cursed loudly. It was Count Hale, who wondered where Malcolm had gone, as he had not seen him yet. Malcolm had asked what had happened and about the content of a letter. The letter informed that the Count would need someone to represent him. "I explained to Queen Selisi exactly what you have been selling until now, so rest assured, there's nothing to worry about." The letter had been written by Elon Manisil. The Count wondered if the mage knew about the sacred relics. Hale concluded that if the mage sent the letter, he probably already knew. "And who does the mage think he is to threaten me?" he grumbled. "It's irritating to have to bow to the damn commoner prince. He must be thinking that I would come to him trembling, but he shouldn't have underestimated me. He thinks I haven't made any preparations in advance," said Count Hale. Then he entered a room full of treasures. As he observed the wealth, he thought he could have gathered even more. Walking to a safe, he murmured, "Whatever," for he possessed something far more valuable. He opened a small box, which was filled with relics. He stated that with so many relics, he could obtain a great fortune. As he spoke about his plans, Hertz began to emerge behind him. Just as the Count was about to close the small box, it vanished from his hand. He looked back, saw the small box in Hertz's hand, and was startled. He asked if that was invisibility magic. Hertz nodded his head and revealed himself to be Prince Callian's mage. He said he was very grateful as the Count had found the evidence with his own hands. And he added, ironically, for the Count not to worry, as he himself would take care of telling the damned cunning mage and the damned commoner prince. The mage then took the sacred relics to Callian. Hertz informed him that he had also taken all the papers with leaked information from Karis and about Hale's relic trade. The prince, with a smile on his face, thanked the mage, saying that thanks to him, the mess was almost complete. Ian opened the door desperately, calling for the prince, asking him to look outside. Then, knights wearing golden armor approached. It was a large fleet of men mounted on their horses. The prince, observing through the window, recognized King Kaela's personal knight. He wondered why those knights, whose function was to protect the king and Kairis, were there.